the it was done in Murshidabad period. But I don't think we can think of anything produced in Bengal which is older. But sadly, for us, Bengal had a very thriving culture of painting during the Pala era, roughly. I'm designating that era Pala era, I mean, before the Islamic conquest. But sadly, most of it is lost. And a very few specimens of it survive. Some are very doubtful sort of provenance. There must have been thousands of paintings done in Bengal and Bihar. I'll come to that. But out of that, you'll be amazed to know probably only 1.1.5. I say 1.5 because one is pretty damaged and the other one is of doubtful origin. So maybe 1.5 large-scale or full-scale paintings, which was done in Bengal or Bihar, exists in Tibet. So what happened to this vast corpus of painting? Of course, it vanished for a variety of reasons. We'll go into the reasons probably, or we'll probably not. Anyway, because painting, this I want to say at the very outset, is a very fragile work of art because it's mostly done on paper or cloth, and they, by their very nature and by virtue of our hot and humid weather, is very hard to preserve. That is why, and due to other political and cultural factors, we have very few paintings that have come down to us. But it is in the Nepali and Tibetan art that the heritage of Bengali and Bihar. I'll call this East India, and by East India, I would mean the Bengal art or Bihar art, or I'd say Bengal art. Okay, so I'll use these terms interchangeably in my talk. Anyway, but Tibetan art, that is Tibetan Buddhist art, what we normally call Thangka painting, carries the heritage and tradition of Bengali art. And we'll try to see the remaining specimens of Bengali Buddhist art of the Pala era that we are fortunate that they have survived. And the story of their survival also quite thrilling. So we'll look into those Bengali arts that have served, Bengali paintings. I am focusing primarily on paintings, the Bengali paintings that have survived and how far it has influenced Tibetan art. And I'll also talk about the style of that Bengali art, because I urge you to see this picture that is there on the screen. I mean, when we look at it, I mean, if you are somebody who's interested in the field, you'd probably know this is painted in Bengal. But otherwise, most people would say this is Tibetan, or I think most people would not have any sort of comment on as to where this painting is from. But this is probably the only complete large-scale painting that was definitely done in Bengal or Bihar that has survived up to the present day. So I'll talk in length about this painting, but at the very beginning, I want you to look at this painting, because I think for us, most of us are Bengalis here, it is a great heritage and it's such a sort of, I mean, we just have 1.5 paintings to go by. I mean, in terms of our heritage. So I want you at the outset to look at this painting very sort of with a lot of attention. Later, I'll try to go and analyze this painting in a lot of detail, because this painting holds a lot of clue for us as to understanding what do I mean by Bengali art. And later, I would like to go to Tibetan art and see how far the Bengali style or the East Indian style has been carried over into Tibetan art. And okay, so without further ado, let me go. So, Ajanta is, of course, in a sense, the beginning, or not the beginning, but what we have as the first instance of Buddhist art. And I just wanted to show a picture of Ajanta, because Ajanta was done probably from 200 BC, the caves of Ajanta, from around, I say, till up to the Gupta age. So just I wanted to show Ajanta's picture, because this is pretty much we have in terms of precedent in Indian art. And then pretty much we have to come to the Pala era. But it is said from historical sources that, and these paintings are called patas or potochitro, basically. The term that we use now, these are called potochitros. So potochitros is essentially paintings that can be folded and stored. So these paintings, sometimes they're displayed permanently, but in most cases, these paintings can be folded and they could be transported easily from one place to another, and they could be sort of hidden, or they should they can be kept, away when they are not meant to be seen. So I'll refer to these paintings mostly as Pottochitro. So let us look at some. So we do not have any Pottochitros surviving from ancient India, but we have some historical sort of mentions of Pottochitro. So for example, in Harshacharit, there is the mention of this Yamapata or Jom pot basically in Bangla, which is basically a description of hell. And that's a very common sight in a lot of Catholic churches, I think, or medieval Catholic churches also, where there'd be elaborate portrayals of hell to remind people of death, and in this case of karma and the possibility of going to hell. And it's described in Harshacharit that this Yampata was displayed by a person who was basically a pot shilpi, and he would charge money. It was like, like we have Putul Nach, something like that. Then in Mudra Rakshash, we are told that these paintings, how they should be shown. And this is here, these Pottochitro paintings, and this is something I want to talk a little bit about, that painting in this context is not merely art as we understand it. It is not a innovation or a creation of the artist's mind. It is in most cases not a comment or comment on the society. So what we know about art is we cannot use those same features to define Buddhist art. Normally, the paintings that I'm going to talk about, they have a very metaphysical and religious value, and the value that we ascribe to art is very different. So we need to reorient our mind probably to appreciate these arts. Okay, so in Mudra Rakshas, this is told that these holy paintings or Pottochitros, the religious Pottochitros. So the first one is a secular Pottochitro, the Jom pot. The religious Pottochitro is meant to be rolled up when it is not being used for ritual purpose. And the opening of the Pottochitro is like a divinity manifesting in him the whole world. So here we see the concept of Pottochitro taking a metaphysical dimension. I will come back to this point where I'll stress again and again how these paintings acquire metaphysical dimensions in this Buddhist context. And we actually have accounts by travelers into India that Eastern India, particularly the monasteries, had a lot of paintings. So this is a 12th century Buddhist author who was from China. He noted about Nalanda, the Nalanda University, that there are many paintings of the Buddha, Bodhisattvas, and Arhats. I'll go to these terms as far as possible too, because I need to talk a little bit about the philosophy also. And these paintings are very different from those of China. So they were done in the Indian style, particularly the East Indian style. But sadly, we do not have any sort of idea as to how these paintings might have looked. We will try to get an idea in the course of this lecture. And there were mystic syllables on the reverse of the painting. Funnily, that is a practice that is still followed in Tibet, where the paintings are consecrated or made to come alive by writing holy symbols or bij mantro in the behind, the back of the painting. So that is also a tradition that has come down to modern Tibetan religion. And there's a description of how they were painted, etc., etc. And in Nalanda, only there's one little ruin that has been discovered that actually has murals done from the Pala era. But I have not been able to find a picture of that, so I'm not able to sadly show you the picture. Anyway, so I'll mostly talk about Bengal, and this is from Taranath, who writes a history of Buddhism in India in 15th century, which is notoriously unreliable, but still, he mentions these two Bengali artists, Dhiman and Bitopalo, who started the two traditions of East Indian artistry and sculpture. Okay, so when we talk about East Indian painting, we'll have to keep in mind that there are two distinct styles. I'll try to show those styles. That is the Bengal style and that is the Bihar style. So we'll come to them, and roughly Dhiman and Bitopalo would sort of are sort of the progenitors of these two schools. And there is no Pottochitra that has survived. But the sources keep mentioning the creation and use of Pottochitra in Buddhist ritual context. So we know these Pottochitras must have proliferated in ancient India. Okay, so now I want to talk about painting Patochitros and painting mandalas in a ritual context. And for my help, I have taken some help from this text called the Manjushri Mulakalpa, which is a Buddhist tantric text, which is a very early Buddhist tantric text, the 6th century, 7th century. And there is a very detailed description of how this Patochitro should be done, which gives us an idea about the craft of the Patochitro, as well as the sacral, as well as the sort of metaphysical import of what it meant to draw a Patochitro. In fact, most of the Buddhist tantras, at least the ones I have come across, talk about painting the picture of the deity with a lot of detail, and the ritual aspect of it and the artistic aspect of it. So it is not just the artistic, the craft aspect that is described in these tantras. There is also an equal focus on, suppose, the qualities of the artist. There's a lot of focus on the time, the Rashi, the Tithi Nakshatra of when you should paint the Patochitro. So both of them exist side by side, which I think, gives another dimension to paintings. That paintings are a sort of, it's almost like performing magic. It is not only the craft, it is also the magic you create, or the power that gets invested into the Patochitro by virtue of following the rules. So let me read a little bit from Manjushri Mulakalpa. It's a huge text, and scattered through it are instructions on how to paint a Patochitra. And this text, as the name suggests, focuses on Manjushri, who's the Buddha of learning. Okay, so let me read a little bit. You can also read along with me. So first, and look at the very meticulously detailed way to paint. First, one should purchase thread with due care, 1 pola or half a pola in weight, and commission a weaver to make a cloth 1 cubit and a half cubit across, together with a fringe. So even fringe is mentioned. Alternatively, etc., one should get cloth like that. In other tantras, it goes into a lot of detail as to what is the quality of the weaver should be, and other things. I have left them out because it would be too long. And then it should be painted using uncontaminated paints infused with sandalwood, camphor, saffron. First, one should mix sandalwood and camphor, etc., etc. So you can see the very elaborate process of even preparing the painting. And there'd be mention of you should do it on the 15th day of this moon of this month, etc., etc. Yeah. So I think here it is, the next slide. And during the Pratihara fortnight, or any day during the bright fortnight, that is basically Shukla Purnima, when the stars are auspicious, and during an etc., etc., so, and then there should be cries of auspicious birds at midnight. One should have the painter do the painting. This should be done in a clean place. So it's almost like as if a religious ritual, a puja, is being performed by the very act of painting the Patochitra, by a painter who's observing the ritual fast and burning an incense of camphor. This is still a practice in a lot of traditional places where religious art is created. For example, people who create the statue of Jagannath, they, the Puri temple or any temple, I think they have to go through this very strict regimen of things that they need to follow. And then the painter should first paint noble Manjushri with the form of a young boy, his hair in 5 locks and dressed with all the adornments of a boy. In the right corner of the cloth, on the margins below the great lake, so Manjushri should be seated on a lotus, and the lotus would be on a lake. The practitioner should be painted. So this is very important. This is where the practitioner or the person who's commissioning the painting is painted into the Patochitra itself. And this is a tradition which still persists now. There are very interesting studies. For example, there's this very fascinating paper by this art historian called Jina Kim, who I borrow greatly from in this presentation, but I'm not talking into that. She has an entire paper where she studies these little donor figures in Pala era statues, those little figures that are put below the main god or deity that is there, the figure of the person who has commissioned the painting of the statue, and she writes a social history of Pala era based on those statues. In fact, that's a different discussion. So how should the practitioner be painted? He holds an incense holder in his hand and inclines his head towards his knee. He should be depicted with all the respective details and color, etc., etc. So Here we see a very detailed description of how to paint a Patachitra, and again, what I said, the craft aspect and the metaphysical aspect, both of them come together. And this is a very important feature when we need to appreciate any Tibetan or any Buddhist painting in this context, that this is art. This is also a form of ritual. So this art and ritual coming together is a different dimension to art that I don't think we are used to today. So this is, I just wanted to show a picture of Manjushri. Of course, this is a very later painting. This is a medieval Tibetan 15th century painting, but I just wanted to show a picture of Manjushri because this is how he looks like, Manjushri. So I'm not going much into the analysis of this painting, but this is Manjushri. Okay, now these are a few techniques that is used in the Indian painting. Let's just go through them very quickly. First, you have shading, which is called Borton essentially, which is you outline the form. And then you have Rekha or Bindu Borton, where you shade by dots and lines. Then you basically do cover the entire painting with color, that is wash or tone, and then you burnish basically. So these are the 4 steps as described in Vishnu Dharmottara Puran, which is a Puran. And then there are these others, this from another sort of treatise on art. And these are, other sort of 8. This text or this treatise breaks down the process of painting into 8 stages. So first there is brush outlining. So you do the outline like we would sketch with a pencil. And then, then Bhumi Bandhu, we do the priming. So we put a layer, first layer on top. Then Rekhakram, which is outlining. Then Lakshan, or Lokhon, which is we paint the iconographic details. Very important, I'll come to it later, because these paintings are paintings where the artist's freedom, something, or the power of the artist's mind to create, something we essentially associate with art. I create something out of my own mind. That is essentially absent here, because these paintings had to be painted under very strict rules of iconography and dhyan. That is how a deity looks like. And there wouldn't be any scope for innovation in the painting of the figures, especially because these are meant for these are meant to be holy objects and for meditation purpose. So every detail of the deity, how his hands are, how his feet are, how his body is, what is he wearing, what is he holding, everything has to be followed till the last detail, or else the painting loses its sort of sacred nature. I'll come to that. But then the question that arises, this question I want to raise at the outset and then maybe later address it. So is it then there is no scope for innovation in this painting? So is the artist here merely a craftsman? Because if you remember this binary between the craftsman and the artist, which was there before Renaissance essentially, I'm talking in terms of Western art. But here, are then these artists really craftsmen? Are their job to just bring out the iconographic details? What happens to their imagination? So where does the imagination or the individual creative power of an artist go? This is something I want to raise this point, because later when I show you paintings, I'll talk about how even there is scope for the creativity or the autonomy of the artist to express himself or herself in these paintings. Mostly him, basically. And there is the blocking of color, and then the shading. There is erasure, where you rub out all the details that you need to change, and there is a final outlining. This final outlining was usually done with maroon, and the eyes were painted with black. So these are basically the processes by which they were painted. And then again, a few details. So black or red outlines are usually sketched first. I couldn't find this picture, but there, there's a picture of an incomplete palm leaf illustration where the artist abandoned the process midway. So there we could see first these outlines are painted, then they're filled with solid colors. So you'd color the body, you'd color the clothes, etc. And then these colors would be derived from mineral sources, very much like Ajanta. That same tradition of how things were painted in Ajanta continues into the Pala era. In fact, the Pala art is pretty close to the Ajanta era, and there is change. Of course, there is regional change and change with time, but it pretty much borrows from the idiom of the Ajanta painting. And the typical colors would be the very basic colors, the white, yellow, blue, vermilion, green, and black. The colors that you can get very easily from minerals and from natural objects around you. And then red ochre was used to make the final sketch, martyr color, while black was applied to define the eyes and features of the face. And even the colors were not random. So when I say that these paintings had to follow the iconographic specification to the last details, that even meant using the colors, because the colors in a tantric Buddhist concept is something very, very important. It is the color of the deities. It is the color of what they hold. It is the color of pretty much everything associated with the description that has a spiritual and tantric connotation, which you know, so even the colors, even in terms of colors, the artist was pretty much bound as to what he can or cannot do. So I just wanted to show you a painting, because I've been talking about the process of painting. I haven't shown, so I thought, let me show you one painting from Pala era. So this is a palm leaf illustration. So we have only, in the outset I've mentioned that we have only one and a half paintings that have survived from the Pala era. But we have been lucky that there has been at least 300 palm leaf manuscripts, or puthis basically, which have survived. And out of that, we have been lucky that some puthis contain these illustrations. And those illustrations have survived, which give us a clue into this lost heritage of art. So this is a page from a puthi, which was painted in the Pala era. I forget which king, I'll come back to it. But here you can see the process of painting. First, you see in the main figure of the Buddha. So this is Buddha saving people from drowning. It relates to one Buddhist myth. So here in the main figure of Buddha, you can see the basic outlining done here in red ochre. You could even see this painting is in very high resolution. You can also see where the brush had started. So for example, here you'll see this line is thicker here. So this is where the painter would have dipped his pen in the brush in the color. And this is probably he put his brush the first time. That is why it has excess of paint there. And then you can see this painting being filled up with flat colors, the red behind and then the blue for the water. And then the figures also filled with colors, then with again ochre, and here in black, the details, the waves of the water has been done in a very sort of not haphazard, a very sort of casual way, because you have to remember these paintings are tiny. They're probably 4-inch by 2-inch paintings. So when you put the size of the paintings in perspective, and it is so very difficult to paint such tiny things, then this thick irregular lines of the painting start to make much more sense, because these are tiny paintings. The level of detail that we can achieve in a big painting cannot be achieved here. But still, this is a pretty mediocre piece in terms of Pala manuscript art is concerned. But I wanted to show this picture because this shows the process of painting very, very well, you know, the lining and how the process is done. But we have even nicer examples of Pala period painting. We'll go to that. So, and they're rather two-dimensional, etc., etc. And there are two styles, that is the Bihar style and the Bengali style. So now we'll go into a few palm leaf manuscripts that have survived from the Pala era, and we'll look at their peculiarities and try to understand what is the Bihar style and Bengali style. But a little bit on the condition of Buddhism in India when the Pala period was there. So we can talk a lot about it, but I will not. Let us just go through a few points which are relevant. First of all, at that point of time during the Pala era, let's just say the last 300 years of the last millennium, or let's say up to the Islamic conquest, roughly that period. So Buddhism was in its final phase in India. So the final phase would be the Vajrayana, or the Tantra basically. So there would be the Hinayana, which is the first or rudimentary school of Buddhism. Then you have the later development of Mahayana, and then finally the Tantra, the Vajrayana, which is the ultimate development in India. So at that point of time, there was Hinayana, there was Mahayana, and there was Tantra, both coexisting in these lands, especially in Eastern India. And in Hinayana, you know, initially, that Buddha was not represented. But later in Mahayana, so Mahayana focuses on devotion and cultivation of special attributes or the paramitas, which helps us to reach Buddhahood. So the devotional aspect becomes very, very strong in Mahayana. And it is when more and more statues and paintings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas become in vogue, where the devotional practices, there's this text, very important Buddhist text, it's called Bodhicharya Avatara by Shantideva, where Shantideva was a monk in Nalanda University in probably 8th century, where Shantideva in chapter 3 gives a very detailed description of how the deity statues of the deities are worshipped, and which is very similar to what is done. You give mala, you give fool, you give dhoop, you wash the statue. So Mahayana brought in all of that devotional aspect, and there was a proliferation of statues and paintings. And then when Tantra came, basically, Tantra took things a little bit more further. And in Mahayana, we have a lot of, sort of paintings and sculptures of the Bodhisattvas, the peaceful Bodhisattvas, Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri. I'll try to show pictures of them, because this is not only art, because there's a lot of cultural and religious story that is also involved here. I'll try to show as much as I can, but let's just say peaceful Bodhisattvas, because Tantra brings in a new set of deities with very different iconography. And then what happens to Vajrayana, basically, very roughly, or Buddhist Tantra. So it was a further development of Mahayana doctrine. So it took the Mahayana doctrine to a sort of another very advanced level. And then there were radical methods in Tantra, for example, and there was a conflict at this time between the monasticism and Tantra. Well, we'll talk about that, because a lot of people became very disillusioned with the very strict life in monasteries. And these yogis left the monasteries, and they had these very unusual careers in a spiritual odyssey, so to say, where they would do things which are not very acceptable in civil society even now, but that helped them achieve enlightenment. So these people are called the Mahasiddhas. I'm sure all of us know about the Charjapods, basically. I think we have to study Charjapods. So these writers of these Charjapods were these Mahasiddhas, people who led very, very unconventional lives, but nevertheless were great Buddhist practitioners and yogis and siddhas. And incidentally, most of the current practices of Tibetan Buddhism, they come down from these Mahasiddhas and not from the monks. So that is the importance of the Mahasiddhas. So these Mahasiddhas and their culture, also grew very popular. And these siddhas defined all caste rules and hierarchies, and they did things which are a little scandalous. For example, Luipa used to live on fish guts. Tilopa, who's a very important figure in Tibetan Buddhism. Tilopa, came from basically Bengal, Eastern Bengal. So Tilopa was a teli, basically. Uni til grind korten. And so these people came from all walks of life. And they often have magical siddhis. So I mention this because these Mahasiddhas become very, very important later in Tibetan art. And why, we'll try to talk about it. And okay. So these are two later Tibetan paintings of two very important Mahasiddhas. So this is Virupa. Virupa is the founder. So Tibetan Buddhism in its current form has four major schools: Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, and Gelug. Nyingma is the old school. I'm not going into those schools, but let's just say the Kagyu school and the Sakya school, both of them in Tibet, trace their lineage from these two Mahasiddhas. This is Tilopa. Tilopa, as I said, the Bengali Tilopa, who used to live beside Ganga. In fact, his most important teaching is called Ganga Mahamudra, because he gave it beside the Ganga Nodi. Anyway, and this is Virupa. Virupa is the founder of the Sakya order of Tibetan Buddhism. Even Virupa has very interesting stories. Here, basically, the story of Virupa is, because it's a very interesting story. So Virupa was initially a monk. Then he got fed up with his monastic life, and then he left monasticism and he started to explore, essentially. And one day he went to this tavern, basically, and he started drinking a lot. And then he realized he's not carrying a lot of money. And then he told the owner of the shop that, okay, I will stop drinking by noon. And then Virupa, by pointing to the sun, and this is what Virupa is doing here, He stopped the passage of the sun so it never becomes noon, etc. Then he accepted teachings from this mysterious lady who's in the tavern, a Dakini, who's basically a etc. etc. Story goes on. So I just wanted to show the picture of these two Mahasiddhas, and above this Mahasiddhas, there's this picture of these deities. Okay, these deities are the main practices of this Mahasiddhas, and even now in Tibet, people, always remember these Mahasiddhas before starting this practice. This is Hevajra, he's a highest Yoga Tantra deity. This is also Chakrashambhar Vajrabarahi, which is another highest Yoga Tantra deity. And both of them are practitioners. They started this lineage into Tibet. They took this lineage into Tibet. They didn't physically take it, but they're successors. Anyway, so in Tantra, the importance of Guru becomes very, very important. Again, this is relevant for us because in Tibet, you get a lot of paintings of Gurus and lineages of the Gurus. So it's a complete sub-genre of Tibetan painting. And there is a lot of secrecy in the Tantras. And it is written in popularly what is called Shandobhasha or twilight language, where you need to be an initiate to understand the language. And even the Tibetan Thankas itself are coded. So that means we need to look and understand how to read the Tibetan paintings in order to really understand them. And then there is supreme importance on the role of the teacher. And then another innovation or another sort of new thing that Tantra introduced into the popular iconographic culture is the influence of this, is the introduction of this very wrathful deities. So these deities are not peaceful, they're not calm, they have very violent imagery. So their hair would be flying, the Sanskrito term is Pingolurdho Jatakesh. So their matted hair is, floating over. And then they would have fangs, they would have nails, they would be wearing tiger skin, and often they would be in sexual poses, which again has philosophical connotations. So Tantra brought that imagery of that sort of violent, or they're called Krodha imagery or Ugro imagery, into Buddhist art. So we'll go into all of that. And so I wanted to give an example of the tantric, the wrathful deities that came into Buddhism with the Tantra. So this is basically Chakrashambhar and Vajrabarahi. They are a very common practice, very prevalent practice in Tibet. So here you can see both Chakrashambhar and Vajrabarahi wearing what is essentially mundumala or garland of skulls, both of them. Vajrabarahi is wearing a garland of dried skulls and Chakrashambhar is wearing a garland of freshly severed skulls. Vajrabarahi and Chakrashambhar, they're also wearing bone ornaments, as you can understand from the details here. And Chakrashambhar is holding an elephant skin, a flayed elephant skin, and he is wearing a tiger skin, and he has in his hands a skull cap and trishul and all this stuff. So this is the whole tantric imagery that I'm talking about. And there in the corners, you can see these Dakinis dancing, who are the attendant figures of Chakrashambhar and Vajrabarahi. So and they are residing in fire. So this fire and this ritual implements and this bone ornaments and elephant skins, this is what I mean by tantric imagery. And this is also a picture of the mandala of Chakrashambhar. This is an entire code of how to practice, or how to worship is a wrong word. Let's say how to meditate on Chakrashambhar. So if one is not initiated into the mandala of Chakrashambhar, this will just appear as decorative elements to a lay person. And that is why when often Tantra is called to be secret, it is also called to be self-secret. That means it's not secrecy means you have to keep it necessarily hidden. It means it is never revealed to somebody who has not studied it. One of my teachers gave a very nice example. That example is like if you give a calculus book, অঙ্কের ক্যালকুলাসের বই কোনো প্রাইমারি স্কুলের বাচ্চাকে দিলে তার কাছে সেটার মাথা মুন্ডু কিছুই সে বুঝবে না, তার কাছে সেটা হিজিবিজি মনে হবে। So these thankas are essentially those coded calculus books which only somebody who has practiced calculus with a teacher would be able to unravel. Maybe if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about this mandala, which is very interesting because this creates an entire universe and you do not need any written words. This mandala is basically enough if you want to practice Chakrashambhar or if you want to do any practice. It summarizes and holds in it every possible thing that you need to do the practice. Anyway, so now we come to this Buddhist painted art that can be classified into sort of three categories. The first is the Patachitra, second is the murals, and the third, the manuscripts. So the Pal era produced all three in a lot, in profusion, because we know from accounts of the historians that there were a lot of Patachitras. It is written in the accounts of the travelers that these temples of even in monasteries like Nalanda, etc., were richly decorated by murals. Imagine Ajanta. Ajanta cannot be an isolated thing. I'm sure there's a culture of decorating Buddhist temples with murals. And finally, the palm leaf manuscripts. Now we'll try to look at examples of all these three produced in Bengal or by Bengali artists, and then we'll move to how that has been carried over to Tibet. And okay, so I'll start with the Tibetans and pot painting a little bit, because the two Patachitras, full-length Patachitras that have pretty much been authenticated by art historians to have been produced in Bengal, or at least by a Bengali artist, both of them are in Tibet now. So we need to look a little bit at the backstory of these two Patachitras because they themselves are very fascinating. So our story starts with Atish Dipankar, who I'm sure you've heard name of, the very famous Indian monk practitioner who was invited to Tibet to basically refine or reform the Buddhism of Tibet. When I talk about the history of Tibet, I'll go a little bit into that. So Atish Dipankar, when he went to Tibet, he took with him a lot of ritual objects, painting, etc. He had a huge retinue, some 40 horses, I think, full of materials, etc., etc. And then he traveled all over Tibet and he gave teachings there. Remember, at that point of time, we do not have evidence if Tibetan painters were very active, because at that time, if you needed any painting from Tibet, in Tibet, you had to basically go to Nepal or order from Nepal, or you have to order from Bengal or Bihar to get your paintings. Okay, so it is recorded that Atish Dipankar, when he was residing in Tibet, and he died in Tibet, he never came back. So he commissioned basically 3 paintings. Okay, he commissioned 3 paintings. These paintings, the first painting I'll talk about because I think art historians have authenticated that this painting has basically survived. This is Manjushri and Maitreya discoursing. It is a vision that he had himself. And so when he had the vision, when he had the dream of these 2 Buddhas talking, he sketched down essentially the details and he sent a messenger to Vikramashila, his own workplace. And essentially, basically, these artists, a lot of these artists were basically monks or people who lived adjacent to these monastic universities, people who would know these images, because it was difficult for a lay person to know how all these deities looked. And there were little handbooks of artists where all these deities are sketched. We do not have a Bengali or an East Indian specimen of these books surviving, but there are the Nepali puthis where basically it's an artist sketchbook, which is very fascinating, which is full of these sketches by artists of these deities. Anyway, so he also commissioned a painting of the Mahabodhi temple in Bodh Gaya and a painting of Sharakhuri Lokeshwar, which is another form of Avalokiteshwara, one of the deities. And these paintings are supposed to be Nethang. Sorry, there's a typo. It's a G. It's a Nethang monastery in Tibet. But these paintings have not been located. Maybe someday these paintings will turn up. The first painting, however, has been located. It turned up in a Western collection. And I want you to look at the painting on the left. I have put the painting on the right so that, because this painting is very, very badly damaged. It is very difficult to make out the details. But sadly, that is why I said 1.5 painting, because this hardly, lets us understand any details about this painting. Anyway, so this is, and this has also been carbon dated, this painting, and the carbon dating has placed this painting in the time of Atisha. That means Atish Dipankar was alive when this painting was done. So we have not only artistic but also scientific evidence of this painting actually being painted in Bihar, in Vikramashila monastery, which is, I think, Bihar Sharif now, and which was transported back to Tibet for Atisha, for his devotional purpose. So let's look a little bit at the painting, as much as we can make out. So these are two Buddhas, and you can look at the painting in the right also for reference. So these are two Buddhas. These are Maitreya and Manjushri. So incidentally, what is the we'll go into the artistic style, but let me talk a little bit about the significance, spiritual significance of this painting. So Mahayana Buddhism basically, roughly or broadly, has two divisions. One is called the Chittomatro, which is basically Chinese Buddhism or the Zen Buddhism now, and the Prasangika philosophy is the Tibetan Buddhism. Atish Dipankar was not one of the few people. Atish Dipankar had a lot of teachers and he was very erudite. And India, during Atish Dipankar's time, both those schools existed side by side. Those schools had a lot of subdivisions. We're not going into that. Right now, those schools don't exist side by side. Prasangika is firmly in Tibet, Mongolia. That is the Tantric Buddhism. And Chinese Buddhism is Chittomatra philosophy. But in Atish's time, both those philosophies existed simultaneously in India, and Atish Dipankar was the lineage holder for both those schools. He basically got it from his master, Subarnodipi, who's from Subarnodip or Sumatra. Anyway, so this painting of Maitreya and Manjushri discussing is basically an union of these two philosophical schools, where these two Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are seen to be talking. And the details are pretty much gone, but you can see here Maitreya, who's having a jota mukut essentially. This is like a jota, and Manjushri is wearing a crown. And there are these little wrathful figures, and here on a table sort of thing, if you can look at the image on the right, there are 3 stupas. Scholars have debated about the reason for these 3 stupas, but they might possibly refer to the 3 jewels, the 3 Ratno, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which is the fundamentals of Buddhism, or it might refer to an actual geographical place of Vikramashila, because in a lot of old Tibetan, old Bengali and Bihar statues, there are often beside the deities, there are 2 stupas, and a lot of people say that those 2 stupas are like a topographical symbol for Nalanda University. So maybe those 3 stupas was an ancient code for Vikramashila. We simply do not know. This is what the art historians speculate. And here at the bottom, you have a series of deities who are listening to this discourse. And here you have, which is very faded away, this design of a very lotus vine. So both Maitreya and Manjushri are sitting on lotuses. And this is the stalk of the lotus here. And this is a very elaborate lotus vine supported by these 2 sort of kinnaras, or whatever you call them, half man, half bird creatures. And there are attendants around these deities. So though the details are not very clear, this gives us a map of Pala paintings, which you will see replicated in better paintings. For example, there would be this lotus seat with a very ornate lotus vine, underneath, and this bottom register. So this painting is called a register painting. I'll talk about it later on. So you will have a later, portion separated at the bottom. As you can see, this red line here running, physically separating the painting with other deities sitting here. We'll see more examples of it. And then, okay, so this is the famous Ford Tara, which is, again, we are not sure whether this was painted in Bengal or Bihar, then transported to Tibet, or a Bengali artist painted it. But we are pretty sure this is from Pala, India. So now I want to show this painting in a little bit more detail to talk about how art historians arrived at the conclusion that this is painted in Bengal. And there are a few very fun clues hidden in this painting, but you have to give me a second, because I I have this painting open in another tab where I can zoom in and show you the details. So you have to give me a little time as I try to show the details. So just give me a second. So I'm trying to open another tab. If you can't see the tab, let me know. I hope the tab is visible. Okay, so this is the famous Tara, Ford Tara, because this is in the Ford collection. I hope কেউ দেখতে না পেলে বলবেন, দেখতে পেলে ঠিক আছে কিছু। Okay, thank you. So this is Tara, who's a very famous Buddhist Devi basically. She is pretty much the most important Buddhist Devi that is there. She is a savior, she is a protectress, and she this particular form of Tara, she's green Tara, is called Ashtomahabhaya Tara because, as the name suggests, she protects from 8 dangers, Ashtomahabhaya. So let me zoom this painting here. So this is the main figure here. As you can see, it's very beautifully done. It's very badly damaged, and she's surrounded by her attendants. I'm not going into that. Here on left and right, you would be able to see this miniature taras. Okay, these are miniature tara figures, and if you look even more carefully, you will see even little figures who have been blessed or protected by Tara. And there are 8 of these. And if more details would have been visible, so see, there are 8 tiny people who are seeking shelter from Tara. So basically, Tara in her Ashtomahabhaya form gives you protection from 8 dangers. These dangers can have external or outward meaning. For example, dangers gulo hocche elephant, lion, snake, water, fire, mane actual dangers that could befall anybody in ancient India. And these 8 fears would also denote one spiritual problem: fear, anger, jealousy, ego, etc. So this Ashtomahabhaya Tara, basically the figure of Ashtomahabhaya Tara. Now, so this is the figure. Now, how do art historians arrive at the conclusion that this is from Bengal? First of all, this is a stylistic one. The lotus vine, this very beautiful, elaborate lotus vine, and the stalk is a very, very distinct Pala feature. And if you look at Pala statues also, I wish I had a picture, but I didn't because the slide was getting too long. You will see all the Pala statues under the lotus. Most of them, a lot of them have these very elaborate lotus vines. Other than that, what are the symbols? The first, let's start from the top. So here we can see essentially kola gach and narkol gach. If you look very clearly, there's banana trees and there's coconut trees. Now, banana trees and coconut trees, none of them grow in Tibet. It is they don't even grow they grow in Nepal, but not in a way that it grows here. So when we associate or when we think about Bengal or Eastern India's flora, essentially, we think of banana trees, plantain trees, or we think about coconut trees. And here and this is the mountain, this is the jewel mountain of Tara. And behind the jewel mountain, we can see coconut trees and banana trees. So this is the first indication that probably a Bengali artist, or the fact it was painted in Bengal. The second and third clue, they're very interesting. One thing, the Tibetans actually abandoned the practice, that is, it is stated in Buddhist artistic manuals that the deity's feet should be always colored red. Mane paye alta porano thakbe. Men, women, nirbisheshe, the Buddhist deities, always the legs are supposed to be alta porano, red color. The Tibetans abandoned this practice because, of course, there's no tradition of wearing alta in Tibet. So here you can see both of Tara's the soles of her feet, this one and this one, both of them are decorated with alta. Essentially, this is the second, sort of indication that this is a Bengali painting. Even now, in our everyday Thakur, Durga, any Thakur you see, the legs are always alta porano thake. So that tradition. And another very, very interesting, very tiny detail, which is not mine. This is from a book by Stephen Cossack. It's called Sacred Visions. Of course, I do not have the erudition to come up with such observations. I'm just talking from a few authors. That notice this leg. I know it's very blurry. There's a toe ring here. Okay. In Tibetan paintings, there are no toe rings. Toe rings are a very essential Indian, something you give the bride. Still in a lot of cultures, I think, especially in the Bihar region, the toe ring of a bride or a married woman is a very important feature. So here, Tara is wearing a toe ring. So, and Tibetans do not have the practice of wearing toe rings. So, based on stylistic grounds and these little details, art historians have been able to, and this is a pretty large painting. I mean, this is not a tiny painting. Historians have been able to, put this painting firmly into that era. So this is probably the only full-length picture, proven full-length picture we have of a painting done in Bengal. Also, this style of doing mountains, okay, as if they say lathi gulo, lathi lathi boshano. This way of doing the mountains is also a very typical Pala feature. And here, there is Atish Dipankar painted here. This is Atish Dipankar, and this is Atish Dipankar's Tibetan #1 chala, Dromtonpa. So Atish and Atish and Dromtonpa are painted here in a sort of very symbolic union of India and Tibet. And Atish starts a line of Buddhism. His school of Buddhism is called the Kadam or the Kadampa. It's called, people who follow the Kadam tradition are called the Kadampas. So this is the Kadampathanka from the Kadam school. The Kadam school does not exist anymore independently. The Dalai Lama school, the Gelug school, has incorporated the Kadam teachings. Okay, so the Kadam school does not exist anymore. So this painting, I wanted to talk, and these deities at the bottom, this is also yes. So this painting is done in the register style. So what is the register style? So you have the main figure in the middle, and there you have a section on top, you have a section on the left, you have a section on the right, you have a section below, which is divided into very discrete sections. These portions are separated completely from the main painting. So this is a register style, and this is the hallmark of the Pala style, this register style. We'll see a few more images. So I'll stop sharing. I'll go back to my PPT. Okay. So yeah. So okay. So now murals. Now we do not have any murals in India, nor we do not actually have proven Pala style murals. These are actually from Bagan in Myanmar. You'd be amazed to know that the murals in Bagan, with a lot of beautiful stupas, they were directly done by Bengali artists, because the queen of Bagan was from Tripura, and she took a group of Bengali artists to Bagan to execute these paintings. Now I'll show you two examples of murals from Bagan and Pala palm leaf manuscripts. You'd be amazed to see that they are separated geographically. These manuscripts are found in Nepal or Tibet, and these murals are in Myanmar. But if you keep them side by side, it will look like the same person has painted them. This is a very bad picture. This is the Bagan mural, and this is a palm leaf manuscript from a Pala era manuscript. If you look at the Buddhas, if you look at the two figures side by side, this is the same painting. It says the same thing. This is an incident in Buddha's life, and he tamed a mad elephant called Nalagiri, which was sent by Devadatta, his cousin, to basically upset Buddha. So here he's taming Nalagiri, and this is a little elephant here. And if you look at the Buddha's posture, if you look at the two monks who are seeking shelter from Buddha, it'll seem like it's almost painted by the same person. And the next painting makes this even. So if you look at, this is from a mural in Bagan in Myanmar, and this is from a manuscript done in Nalanda. Look at the curve of the head of the statue. Look at the fingers of the hands. Look at the shape of the halo behind. I mean, it is definite. I mean, I'm not saying the same artist painted it, but look at them. চোখ মুখের আঁকাগুলো একটু দেখুন। দেখে মনে হয় না একই হাতের আঁকা, মানে এত identical. But of course, we do not have any historical proof that these are executed by the same artist, because this is a huge mural. It's a life-size mural, one on the left, and this is a 4" by 2" painting. But just look at the overall vibe and feeling of these two paintings. For me, I'm pretty convinced the same person did it, though I have no historical evidence to prove it. You cannot get alada alada hate eto identical. It's very sort of interesting. Okay, now we come to Pala palm leaf manuscripts, the thing I want to talk about. So this quote is very interesting. So a lot of Pala era Puthi, Talpatar Puthi has come down to us. And that is our biggest sort of source, primary source for us to understand Pala art. So this is a quote which is famously found in a lot of Pala manuscripts, which I found very funny. Because these Pala palm leaf manuscripts, they take a lot of aspects. There's the artistic, there's the spiritual, there's the practical, there's the devotional. So I'll try to talk about them. But the end of these manuscripts, this is like a handle with care, circa 10th century message, which is like, save me from water, protect me from oil and from loose binding, and do not give me into the hands of fools. Mane tel jol lagano jabe na. I think, you know, even now a lot of things that we value, we say tel jol lagle noshto hoye jabe. Anyway, so this is, I found this slightly funny that, you know, such a serious book with serious intentions. I'll talk about those books, religious scripture, and in the end you have such a practical advice. So I decided to start at least the manuscript section with this quote, and this is exactly from one of the palm leaf manuscripts. Okay, so a little bit overview. So around 300 manuscripts have come down to us. I'll show pictures of it, and I'm sure most of you know how a puthi looks like. So there would be talpatar leaves, palm leaves. They would be like stitched or held together by a piece of cord, and they would have wooden covers on their both sides. And the most, you know, it's not the puthis that have come down to us. They roughly belong to two categories, roughly 90% of them. Out of that 90%, 90% is a text called Ashtashaharshika Progga Paramita, which is a very central doctrine of Mahayana Buddhism. So this Progga Paramita represents the highest wisdom of Mahayana Buddhism, and it is pretty much the foundation. I'm not going into the philosophy. And Progga Paramita is represented as a goddess, who's the goddess of this transcendental wisdom. And Progga Paramita, the scripture Progga Paramita, can exist in various levels. For example, there is a Pancho Shaharsho Binshuti Progga Paramita. There's a Ashto Shaharshika. So there's a Progga Paramita in 25,000 shlokas. There's a Progga Paramita in 8,000 shlokas. From there, Progga Paramita can be even a single seed syllable. So Progga Paramita and the book Progga Paramita has a central importance in this Buddhist scheme of things, and these books were copied and produced by people to gain merit. So for example, in Buddhism, if you commission a copy of Ashtashaharshika Progga Paramita or Progga Paramita, and then you ritually worship it, like we do in Saraswati Puja, onekeri dekben boi puja hoy Saraswati Puja. So this boi puja tradition is very old. In 8th, 9th century, I'll show you pictures that there are traditions of Pustak Puja. So this Ashtashaharshika Progga Paramita, commissioning this text, reading this text, gains you a lot of merit. So Progga Paramita texts were published in huge quantities. It's a very dense philosophical book. And within those Progga Paramita texts, we have these illustrations, these very little paintings done, which are our essentially only window to understand Bengali art of that point. And these books were commissioned by lay people, and there are studies done on these lay people and women also. There's a lot of women who commission these books. Very, very, you know, sort of interesting that it's not only men. Women, a lot of women commission a lot of books and statues and paintings in ancient India. Well, painting, there's no evidence, but I'm just saying if they commission statues and palm leaf manuscripts, I'm sure they've commissioned paintings. Anyway, and interesting thing about it, so this is Progga Paramita, Devi Progga Paramita. I wanted to show you a picture. So she represents this transcendental highest knowledge of Buddhism. So she holds these two lotuses in her hand. Both these two lotuses have books on them. So the central importance of book in the iconography of Devi Progga Paramita. And the book is also her. This is very important to understand. The book itself becomes the Devi. In fact, the Devi is a rather rare iteration. In fact, Progga Paramita is actually worshipped in Nepal in the form of book and not in the form of statue. But still, I wanted to show you a picture of Devi Progga Paramita. Now, so this is a statue from Orissa of Devi Progga Paramita. If you look here, you will see that this couple here, this is the person who commissioned the painting, and this is his wife, this is two son, daughter, whatever. they are worshipping the book. The book is kept on a stand, and there is the Vajracharya, which is the equivalent of a Purut basically. So the Vajracharya, the Purut Mashai, is on this side, and there are these two tormas or ritual offerings, like ekhono biete je Shri use hoy, Shri er moton. There are two lamps here, and they are worshipping the Pragya Paramita book here, and there are flowers on it. So this tradition of Pustak Pujo is very old, and this tradition persist even now in Nepal. In fact, the manuscripts of Pala era that have survived, they have survived in Nepal, where they're still ritually worshipped. So this is the manuscript, one of the manuscripts, which is, as you can see, it's a pujo. The book is wrapped, and there's a statue of Devi Pragya Paramita, and there's a pujo happening in ritual context here. So this tradition is still there, and this gives us a picture of how it might have looked in ancient Bengal. Okay. Now, what do these books represent? First of all, this book is a portable shrine. You can take it anywhere, you can worship it. Now, the illustration of this, so this is what a Pal Juger Puthi looks like. This is one of the few complete Puthis that have survived. These are the two wooden covers. These wooden covers are also very richly and elaborately painted, as you can see. And these Puthis, they have illustrations here. These illustrations are usually at the middle and the side. Sometimes there is decorative bands running. What is interesting is these illustrations, they have no relation to the text, because Ashtasashika Pragya Paramita is a very abstract philosophical text. There is no way for anybody to illustrate Ashtasashika Pragya Paramita. So, what do these paintings function? Thale, why these paintings in these manuscripts? So now we'll study these paintings in the manuscript and see how these books are not only things that you read, they also become ritual objects, because these paintings are of Buddhist deities. So this book essentially becomes a shrine, with the paintings having no relation essentially with the written word. They become a sort of worship. You can take them anywhere. These pictures become a sort of devotional center of devotional attention. So let us now look at a few Puthis. I'll take 2-3 Puthis basically from Pala era and show their interesting features. Oh, this is a book cover. Sorry, this slide got a little back. This is done by Bengali artist, as it is very clear from the image of the Tara. It is very typical, done in Pala fashion, but this is in Tibet. So this entire metal work, so by this we know that Indian Bengali artists also were excelled in metal work, and this roundels having Tara, and this is I think Manjushri, show the high skill of Bengali artists. Acha, so this is okay. So Ashtasashika Pragya Paramita is the most important text. The other text that is important, in fact in Nepal that is still very popular, this is something called Pancharokha. So the Pancharokha, they're a class of these 5 deities. You can read the names here, and these deities, as the name suggests, they have protective function. So Pancharokha Devi, their broto Nepale খুব popular. মানে আমাদের এখানে যেমন ব্রত করে তেমন সত্যনারায়ণ ইত্যাদি, নেপালে বুদ্ধিস্টরা এই পঞ্চরক্ষার ব্রতটা খুব পপুলার, where these books of this Pancharokha Devis, and all 5 of them are Devis, and they are worshipped in the form of that Pancharokha brotos, and the broto books are basically this Pancharokha text. Out of these, I think the name Mahamayuri might appear familiar, because amaro 11-12 এ রবীন্দ্রনাথের গুরু ছিল। আপনারা যদি কেউ পড়ে থাকেন, গুরুতে মহাময়ূরী দেবীর পুজো নিয়ে একটা ওই রবীন্দ্রনাথের সাটায়ার আছে, পুকুরের ধারে কি সাপের খোলস পুঁততে হবে, because Mahamayuri Devi protects from snake bites essentially. So and the name Mahamayuri might be familiar to some of us. Anyway, so this manuscript is from the year 39 of the reign of Rampal, which is basically in 12th century, who's the Pala king. And this is the colophon. So colophon basically is very interesting, because this text would have these dedicatory inscriptions at their ending. Somebody has raised a hand. I mean, do you want to ask something? We can take the questions later if you don't mind. And
yes. Shormishtha.
Okay.
You may ask question in any language.
শেষে নিয়ে আমরা শান্তনুদা।
Okay.
হ্যাঁ শেষে নিতে হবে কোয়েশ্চেন, মোটামুটি ভুল করে হাত দেবো।
হ্যাঁ, anyway, so these colophons at the end of the manuscript give us detail about the person who has commissioned the painting, and very interestingly, the person who has written calligraphy. So these calligraphic studios and painting studios were this huge deal in Pala, India. And so this is the colophon of this text. So this text of goddess Pancharaksha was written by a scribe, Sri Vibhuti Deva. So the name of the scribe who has written the manuscript comes first. During the flourishing, victorious reign of King Srimad Rampal, the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Master, the Supreme Buddhist, the best king of the great kings, in the year 39 of his reign, at the 6th day of the month of Bhadro, on Thursday, during the 3rd or 2nd Tithi of the lunar mansion of Uttar Falguni, etc., etc. So this gives us a complete detail about this text here. We see the name of the person who has commissioned the painting. We get the king under whom it was commissioned, under whose rule. We get the name of the scribe, and in certain cases, we also get the name of the artist. And what is this inscription below? Very interesting. All these puthis, you know how they survived? Most of them are found in Nepal. So the theory is that at the wake of Islamic conquest, the Buddhist monks took these puthis because they were portable, and they fled to Nepal, basically, where the puthis continued to be worshipped and preserved. So a lot of these texts have a second or third colophon, where later on the Nepali scribes have added the time when they got the book in their hands. So this is a very beautiful history of a migration of a text and how it has managed to survive for over 1200, 1300 years. So I find it very fascinating. It gives us a window into the portability of such religious objects. Okay, so these are the paintings that are there. So I'm not going into the details of the paintings, just we can look at the paintings. I just want to make a few comments. So these are basically the Pancharokha Devis, okay, with, and each Pancharokha Devi is paired with a tantric form of a Buddha. So as I said, the color was very important. So this is green Mahamayuri, who's paired with a green Amokshiddhi Buddha. So all these paintings, they have an internal logic. So here, this is the logic that on two sides of the Talpata, so imagine the puthi, apnara, that two side, on one hand, you have goddess Mahamayuri, onnodike you have the green Amokshiddhi, which gives it a harmonious balance of green. Imagine করুন এই দুটোকে পুঁথির দু এন্ডে, you will see, and দেখবেন দুজনের ঘাড় গুলো দেখুন, খুব ইন্টারেস্টিংলি দুজনের ঘাড় দুটো একে অপরকে ফেসিং. Now imagine these two paintings on two sides of the written text, তাহলে সিমেট্রিটা আপনারা বুঝতে পারবেন. And there's another feature, the shrine, পেছনে দেখুন একটা মন্দিরের মতন আঁকা. This is a feature of Bengali school of paintings, where these deities are inevitably placed in a mandir, in a shrine-like structure. And these shrines, because amader kono Pala era kono shrine is not intact in Bengal. So this gives you an idea of how the shrines, actual Pala era shrines, might have looked like. Okay. So this is a painting which I blew up of Tara. So, I mean, it's just note the shrines here, the shrine, and this very detailed gold filigree work. Gold here, the shrine details have been done. And this is Tara. This is basically Mahashri Tara, form of Tara, with her two attendants. So not much to comment here, except I just wanted you to show a picture in greater detail. And this temple, and this is how historians think Bengali temples might have looked like at the point of time, because we do not have any surviving evidence simply. Okay. So I'm not going into a lot of style. So this is another text. This is from the reign of the Pala king Madanpal from 1160. So here also you have a series of illustrations, and it was written by somebody called Sri Dharok, a resident of Doshili Gram. We don't know where this is from. And what is interesting, that this text was commissioned by a nun called Mahashri Bhadro. So not only men, not only monks, it was women also who commissioned these paintings. So that's why I wanted to include the details of this colophon, because, you know, we usually don't get examples of nun commissioning paintings. We have a lot of monks commissioning statues in history. Okay, so here also I'll talk briefly about this is how the few illustrated pages look like. So little internal logic in these paintings. So here the most important incidents that are depicted here are the 8 events in the life of Buddha. So during the Pala era, Buddha's sculptures and paintings, this format became very popular, where there'd be 8 events from Buddha's life, and they will be depicted side by side. So for example, let me try to explain a few. So this represents, on the top left, Buddha's birth. This is Queen Maya Devi giving birth to Buddha. This is Buddha achieving enlightenment at Bodh Gaya. This is indicated by Buddha's Bhumisparsha Mudra, Buddha touching the ground, as Bhudevi as Shakhi. And these are the 2 daughters of Mara who had come to distract Buddha. This is Buddha's first sermon at Sarnath, where it is indicated by Buddha's hand in this Dharmachakra Pravartan Mudra, which is a teaching mudra. Then this is Buddha's miracle at Shravasti, where Buddha multiplied into 1,000 or something to convince non-believers of his enlightenment. Then this is Buddha ascending to Triatimsa heaven, when Buddha went to preach dharma to Buddha's dead mother Maya Devi. This is indicated by Brahma and Indra being 2 sides of Buddha when Buddha came down from Triatimsa heaven. This is Buddha taming Nalagiri. I've talked about this. This is Buddha accepting basically Modhu from a monkey in Vaishali. And this is finally Buddha's death. Along with that, we have a few pictures of Buddhist deities. This is Avalokiteshwar, this is Tara, and commonly they are called consorts of one another. So again, the texts are arranged in the illustrations are arranged in the order of consorts. And here, interestingly, this is Amitabha Buddha and this is Pragyaparamita, who basically start this lineage. So this is the internal logic of this puthi. So these paintings are not random. Here we have only 2 levels of illustration. The Hinayana, or the very basic level, which is indicated by the Buddha's life events. And then we have the Mahayana aspects coming in by these deities, because these peaceful deities, if you remember, are Mahayana deities. So you have Mahayana imagery coming in here. In a later document, we'll see how Tantric imagery comes in. Okay, so this was created near Nalanda, and this was used in Nepal. And I think the book cover has Shidur Ebam Chandoner Phota, which indicates, and the Devis, that Pancharokha text, they have Shidurer Phota, the Devis, which indicates they have been worshipped in the past. Okay, so this is again a picture of Pragyaparamita. I just wanted to show a detail. So you can see very basic 3-4 colors, master brushwork, and the quality is not so good. Again, this is a illustration of quite mediocre quality, but we can appreciate the beauty, the beautiful, Tribhanga, not Tribhanga is a standing posture, but still the, Tinbar, thrice sort of bent posture of Pragyaparamita, which gives it a lot of grace. Essentially, it's like a Tribhanga only. Okay. Again, this is done in Bihar. Okay, so this point. Ager manuscript was done in Bengal, and Bengal manuscripts have the temple-like structure around them. The Buddhists, the Bihar ones, do not have the temple-like structure usually, and they will have a simple halo around them. So this is the rough difference between the Bengal and Bihar style. Okay, the next manuscript is done in Pala time, but this is very, very interesting. This is done in Nepal. This is painted in Nepal, but this painting, and you can go look at the painting, because Cambridge University has the entire digitization of this puthi. This entire puthi is digitized in Cambridge University Library, and you can zoom in and you can see the pictures, which is very exciting. So this painting, this manuscript was produced in Nepal. It had illustrations. And the illustrations are very interesting because these illustrations had labels. For example, let me show you a picture. So this, okay, so this is the illustration. So see, the text is written in a larger font. Below there is something written in a smaller font. This is in Nepali sort of alphabet, but interestingly, আমি যদি বাংলাটা বলি, মানে বাংলা এটাকে কি পরে বলি, আর আপনারা যদি কিছুক্ষণ তাকিয়ে থাকেন এটা পড়তে পারবেন। This is basically a label as to what this shrine is. So this manuscript is basically full of actual Buddhist temples and actual Buddhist statues that existed in India and Southeast Asia, mostly in Bengal. So that way, just excuse me for a second. So that way, this manuscript is invaluable to us because it helps us to get a idea of the sacred geography of Buddhist India as well as Buddhist Southeast Asia. মানে এই বইটায় আমি ছবি আনিনি. There is a picture of Mahachine Monjushri, there is a Sumatraয় this deity, there is Singhale Avaliketeshwar, but I will just show you the Bengali temples and a few examples. So this basically is, so etar inscription হচ্ছে Tira Bhakto Vaishali Tara. So this Tara is the picture, is the representation of an actual Mandir and image of Tara that existed in Vaishali. Of course, it doesn't exist anymore. How do we know it's Vaishali? In the last picture, I've shown an event from the life of Buddha where Buddha was offered a honey by the monkey in the city of Vaishali. Then he went to heaven. This monkey became a, went to heaven and had a godlike body. So this here is a topographical sort of reference to Vaishali. And this is Tara, and we actually have historical evidence because there's this Tibetan traveler, scholar, who came after the Islamic conquest. His name is Dharma Swamin, and he gives a very detailed description of the temple of the Tara in Vaishali. Her head and body turned towards the left, foot placed flat, and the right foot turned sideways, and the right hand in Varada Mudra, and the left hand holding the symbol of 3 jewels. If you look at this painting, it pretty much corroborates with the description of Dharma Swamin. So we can assume that these paintings, even though they are tiny, is a window to our past, a kind of sacred geography that is lost to us. So this is one example. This another, so this refers to a specific shrine in a specific place. The next one relates to a person. So this is the picture of a Loknath Avaliketeshwar, and this incidentally refers to a very famous Bengali Buddhist sort of master. His name is Chandra Gomin. He was born in Shamotot, somewhere in Bangladesh now. And this inscription here, দেখবেন Sri Nalendram Chandra Gomin Loknath. এই পেইন্টিংটার দিকে if you stare, দেখবেন এই লেখাটা পরিষ্কার বুঝতে পারবেন দেখে. Anyway, so there's a story that Chandra Gomin in a temple of, in Nalanda, there was a temple of Loknath or Avaliketeshwar where Chandra Gomin used to sit and talk to Avaliketeshwar before the debate. So basically, Chandrakirti, I said Buddhism Mahayana has 2 divisions, the Prasangika and Chittamatra. So Chandrakirti is a great Prasangika scholar, and Chandra Gomin was Chittamatra. So Chandra Gomin প্রতিদিন রাতে তারনাথ বলে যে অবলিকেতেশ্বরের থেকে ট্রেনিং নিতেন কি করে পরাস্ত করতে হয় তর্কযুদ্ধে। তো তাই এই ইমেজটা, and I think this story or this myth gained enough popularity and currency for this to be represented in this painting. And remember at the beginning I said that 2 stupas represent Nalanda. You see here 2 stupas floating in air, which again is a topographical reference to the Nalanda monastery. So one image here is after a place, one image here is after a actual person, so a deity associated with a person. So now this is one map of ancient Bengal. Just we want to have a look at it because now I'm going to show you a few temples from Bengal basically which existed. So a little bit look at what Bengal was called during ancient times. So Rad would be, our part, this side. Pundrabardhan would be North Bengal basically. Shamotat would be here. Vangala would be the Borishal Khulna belt, and Horikel will be here near Assam, the Moimonsingo and all that area. So now let us look at a few paintings. So I'll go through that very fast. So the first one is called, again, look at the banana trees here. The banana trees indicate them being in Bengal. Okay. And then This is a Chaitya, Dharmarajika Chaitya in Rar. This is what it says here. So Rar Bangla, somewhere around there must have been this stupa. And we have no reason to believe that this stupa was drawn from imagination. Perhaps it's a real stupa. But of course, no such trace remains, okay? And this is called the Ramojato Loknath, which is basically the name of the person who created the temple from Rar, Bengal, okay? And then this is again a Tapona in... Sorry, just a second, sorry. Okay, sorry. So there is Barendro. Okay, so Barendro Anchole, this stupa called Mrigastapana stupa. And then there is this is a Loknath from Horikel. Loknath kathata tola ekটু দেখলে বোঝা যাবে. And there is this another stupa in Barendro. And this is Champitola somewhere near Tripura. This is again a Loknath. This is a Mahastangor, which is still a tourist space of tourist attraction and great archaeological interest in Bangladesh, Mahastangor. So Mahastangore, this is the Buddha of Mahastangor. So probably, and this also gives us a very valuable insight on how Bengali temples look like. Dekhun simple chala. এখন যে আমরা 8 চালা 4 চালা বাংলার মন্দির বলি, সেম চালা ট্রেডিশনে মন্দির এখানে, a very simple temple, and এখানে you have more elaborate tired Nagara style architecture that is found in North India with a shikhar and amalaka and everything. I'm not going into that, but it gives us a clue as to how Bengal temples would have looked like. Okay, this is very interesting in the sense this is Pattikera Chunda. So Pattikera is Tripura area, and this is probably, and Chunda is a Devi. And this is probably the only illustration which might have a very tenuous evidence that this actually existed, because look at this image, and this is an image of a Devi which is worshipped in Tripura. A friend of mine wrote a paper saying this is basically the cult statue of Chunda that we see here. This is in Tripura. Look at these two paintings for a second. They look eerily similar. So this might, or right now it's worshipped as Durga or Chundi or something, but they look pretty similar. And I think we can safely make the claim that this might be the cult statue that is being referred to in this manuscript. Okay, so this is also Shomotot area, Tara. So just another. So there are many Bengali temples. Most of these temples are from Eastern India. So that way this manuscript is invaluable to us. Okay. There's this another, I'm running out of time. I realize I'll probably not be able to go to Tibet, but let me finish this. This is another painting. This I want to talk about because it talks about the style of arranging the manuscript. Okay, so এইখানে আপনাদের একটু imagination use করতে হবে। এই চারটে পাতা দেখুন, চারটে পাতার আমি নেম করেছি 1, 2A, 2B and 3. 2A and 2B can usually, these palm leaf manuscripts are illustrated and written on one side. Kintu incidentally, a 2A or 2B মানে এটা হচ্ছে একই পাতার two sides of the same page. তো দেখুন প্রত্যেকটা পেজে এক সাইডে illustration. Then why suddenly একটা পেজের দুদিকে illustration? This shows us about the aesthetic concerns that the scribes and the artists had in mind. So let me talk about this. It's very interesting. দেখি বোঝাতে পারি কিনা। So একটু ইমাজিন করেছেন, সো এটা একটা পাতা, এই দুটো হচ্ছে একটা পাতা দু সাইড, আর 3 হচ্ছে আরেকটা পাতা। এবার পুঁথিটা ধরুন খুলছেন আপনি, সো এটা ফার্স্ট অফ অল দ্য স্টাইলিস্টিক অর দি প্র্যাকটিক্যাল কনসিডারেশন। সো এই ফোলিও 1-এ a chapter ends and the next chapter is a very short chapter, 3 পাতার একটা চ্যাপ্টার। সো যেই মুহূর্তে দুদিকে লিখে দিল, তাহলে থার্ড পাতায় সামনে গিয়ে শেষ হয়ে গেল, মানে 4 নম্বর ফোলিওতে একটা নতুন চ্যাপ্টার শুরু হচ্ছে ফ্রম আ ইভেন পেজ। জানি না বোঝাতে পারলাম না কিনা। সো মানে the chapter ends here so that the next chapter does not begin in the middle, does not begin in the 2-second page. There is another feature. This is a picture of Marichi. So these are the first two, মানে এটা হচ্ছে প্রথম পাতা আর এটা হচ্ছে সেকেন্ড পাতার সামনেটা। This is a picture of Marichi. So আপনি খুললেন, এই দুটো পাতা is facing you, এই পাতাটা ওপরে, এই পাতাটা নিচে। This is a picture of the goddess Marichi, her two-handed form. In Tantra, the two-handed forms are usually the outward forms, যেগুলো low level practitionerদের দেওয়া হয়। তারপরে তাতে তারা সিদ্ধি লাভ করলে you move on to the more higher forms of the deity. So here you have a two-handed version of Marichi. আপনি ধরুন বইটা দেখছেন, এরকম করে আপনি বইটা, তারপরে আপনি পাতাটা উল্টালেন, যেই পাতাটা উল্টালেন এই দুটোকে দেখতে পেলেন, এটা একটা তারা। And incidentally, এইটা is the eight-handed form of Marichi. মানে কি হলো, আপনি পাতা উল্টালেন, এই যে মারিচির পাতাটা আপনি উল্টালেন, আপনি এই অষ্টভুজা মারিচি দেখলেন। And as I said, the more higher tantric form, the more hands. So this book itself, তো আপনি ধরুন বইটা পড়ছেন, so this is the symbolic importance of this illustration. So the process of reading this book leads to your spiritual advancement. So it is a play on that, যে আপনি বইটা পড়ে সাধনায় অগ্রসর হচ্ছেন। Essentially you are moving forward in your meditative practice, that you're moving from the two-handed Marichi given to inferior practitioner to the full eight-handed form of Marichi with 8 hands. Okay, so this is also the logic by which this illustration is arranged, which I think is wonderful. So this is one quirky aspect about this. I'll also, so this is another manuscript where we get a very rare instance of the donor. So this person is called Ramdev. Looks a little bit like modern Ramdev also. Anyway, sorry, but this Ramdev, he is the person who had commissioned the book, and he here is with another Buddhist monk, and they are doing the Pustak Pujo here. This is the book on the stand. So here you have the picture portrait of the actual person who has commissioned the book, and we can have a look how a Bengali man of that time looked like. And he's a layman, he's not a monk, as indicated by his short dhuti, and this is a monk as indicated by his robes. And here also below we have the figures of the donors painted. So this is the priest and the family. So here the writing has been shortened to incorporate the donors here. Okay, so now this next text, so these texts all have Mahayana imagery. The next text, which is a later development, start to incorporate tantric imagery. So we are actually in the level of the text also, we can see that we are moving towards the final phase of Buddhism, where all the three schools of Buddhism, the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Tantrayana or the Vajrayana, exist side by side. How do we understand this? At the outset, cover you have scenes from Buddha's life. I mean, this is Buddha's death, this is Nalagiri, this is others. Here you have Amitabha Buddha and Proggaparamita, very, very Mahayana deities. But after that, the equation starts to change. These deities are standing, and from this very poor image, you'll be able to understand that these are not the peaceful Mahayana deities. They are wearing these mundumala, they have this trishul in their hand, they have jota. So these are the tantric deities. So now tantric deities start to make an incursion in the text. And you know what is interesting? So these tantric deities, so this is like a common, as I already showed, tantric imagery, where these two deities, Chakrashambhar and Vajrabarahi, and in this case Hebajro and Noiratta, they are in union. And that is how they should be meditated on this tantric union. Now, this tantric union is very secret, and it is not supposed to be, the paintings of tantric union are not supposed to be seen by a layperson, somebody who's not initiated into this. Now, also, they represent basically, there are two methods to gain bodhi, and they need to go side by side. That is progga and upay, method and wisdom. So the female Vajrabarahi represents wisdom, and Chakrashambhar represents progga. And it is when progga and union comes together, that when progga and upay come together in a symbolic fashion, which are qualities of us, we can reach bodhi. So this is basically a symbol of enlightenment, and progga and upay are unified. Now, look at this. This is Hebajro, this is Noiratta. Basically, these two people separated. And this is Chakrashambhar and Vajrabarahi. These two people separate, these two figures separated. Now, when you open the book, when the book is coming out to the public, these deities are separated. তখন এই ইউনিয়নটা is hidden from the eyes of the practitioner. But when the book is closed, এবার ইমাজিন করুন পুঁথিটা বন্ধ করে দেওয়া হচ্ছে, তখন হে বজ্রের ওপর নৈরাত্মার ছবি চড়ে গেল, চক্রসম্বরের ওপর বজ্রবারাইয়ের ছবি চড়ে গেল। So in the book this tantric union is achieved, the progya and upay come together, also it stays hidden. So this is a very clever way of imparting tantric, Gupta tantric knowledge essentially in the level of the illustration of the text, which is extremely fascinating. Okay, another, this is probably the last puthi I'm going to talk about, then I have to quickly move to Tibet, I don't have much time. So here, if you notice in the first page, this is another puthi with a lot of tantric text and Mahayana text strewn side by side. Okay, so আপনারা যদি একটু ভালো করে দেখেন এই ফোলিওটা, the second folio and the fourth folio, আপনারা কিছু can you see anything that is a little here I want if somebody would volunteer তাহলে খুব ভালো হবে, because is there anything that you see which is incongruous? This is the only point. If somebody volunteers, what is little incongruous about these two? Look at the image, look at the text. Is there something that is not incongruous? Second or fourth time. Okay, so basically if you look properly, anybody wants to please, anybody, I think somebody turned on their mic, please, if somebody wants to say, I can take one.
ঠিক বুঝতে পারছি না, কিন্তু একটা আপসাইড
yes exactly, লেখাটা সোজা, the paintings are upside down. Okay, কেন দেখে মনে হচ্ছে ডেটি গুলো হেডস্ট্যান্ড করছে, but why this অদ্ভুত উল্টো images? Again that same logic, because these deities are all paired with each other in the tantric theory. So the moment you close the book, দেখবেন যখন বইটা ক্লোজ করবে, the deities will একে অপরের ঘাড়ে চেপে বসবে এক্স্যাক্টলি সিমেট্রিক্যালি, মানে যেখানে মন্দিরের আউটলাইন আছে সেটা মন্দিরের আউটলাইনের উপর উঠবে, এই ডেইটির মুখটার সাথে এই ডেইটির মুখটা উঠবে, এই ডেইটির বডির উপর এই ডেইটির বডিটা উঠে যাবে। তাহলে কি হবে, এই ইমেজটা যদি সোজা থাকতো তাহলে একে অপরের ঘাড়ে উল্টো করে উঠতো, মানে যেখানেই ওপরের বুদ্ধটার মাথা সেখানেই তলার ডেইটির পাটা উঠে যেত। So here basically to maintain the sanctity and the dignity of the deities essentially, যাতে একের পা একের মাথায় না উঠে যায়, মানে I have to put it that blandly, but basically to maintain the sacred dignity of the deities are painted in opposite fashion, so that when the book closes they are not like একে অপরের গায়ে মাথায় পা দিয়ে আছে essentially. So here we see even these deities are being considered not only illustrations but actually manifestations of the divine, মানে মন্দিরে যেমন করে দেবতাদের রাখতে হয়, যেখানে দেবতাদের অসম্মান করা যায় না, সেরকম ভাবেই বইয়ের ইয়েতেও লেভেলেও you have to keep dignity of the deities. Next এই সেকেন্ড পাতায় দেখবেন দুটো ইলাস্ট্রেশনই উল্টো। Okay, and these deities are protective deities. এবার বইটা যখন বন্ধ হবে দেখবেন এই দুটো পাতাও উল্টানো হলো, তাহলে কি হবে, and these are protective deities. So these deities এই বইটা যখন বন্ধ হবে they are literally shutting the book from outside evil influences. এখানে একজোটি আছে, একজোটি is basically তারাপীঠের তারামা essentially, you know, with a lot of riders, but essentially. So this, and ekojoti in Tibetan tradition is also a protectress of ati yoga, it's a form of yoga anyway. So a protected deities der patagulo, these are the last pages, egulo bondo hoye the book is actually sealed shut from outside malevolent influences, and these texts form that sort of a lock, a double lock if you can put it that way, for these paintings. So these are a few innovative or let's just say stylistic and iconographic and religious innovations of these texts, which are pretty interesting. They're not just random illustrations, there's a thought that comes into them. And by this time, 12th century, when these texts are being composed, there's a lot of tantric deities, so almost 50-50. So from 2-3 tantric deities in the initial phases, we have the incursion of a lot of tantric deities, which also happens historically. So the historical influx of tantric deities also is reflected on the level of this text. Okay, so I bolchilam mediocre paintings bolchi, these according to me are the best paintings, and they are the best paintings. This is done in Nalanda. Again, this is 4 inch by 2 inch, but I'll give you a moment to just appreciate. I'll not talk about this painting, but I'll just give you a moment to appreciate the beauty of this painting. I'll just make one comment. At the very beginning, I said that these deities are very specified as to what can be done or what cannot be done, right? So here, where is the scope of creativity? The scope of creativity is in the temple design. Again, Bengal temples possibly would have looked like this. And the trees, again, these trees are very Bengali trees. Kola gach, egulo possibly Ashok gach, because Ashok is very important in Buddhist imagery. And these are narkol gach, coconut trees. So again, very Bengali, very East Indian trees. Okay, so yeah, so basically that is what I wanted to comment. This is where the artist had his freedom. This is another painting of that same set. This is Chintamani Lokeshwar, where Abaliketeshwar is bestowing gems and jewelry to his devotees, because this painting is it's not a static one. This painting is a very static one, right? Boshe and no movement. But this painting has a beautiful sense of movement. It is as if you have captured the deity in the process of granting, ekhane dekhon Borodo mudra theke hat theke dhanoratna porche arki. In the process of bestowing riches to devotees. So I just wanted to show these two because they probably are the best surviving examples of Pala art, and this gives you an idea about how beautifully the larger paintings might have been done. 4 inchi by 2 inchi the, if there is so much detail, there's so much detail, so much attention to detail. Ei kajgulo, this gold and black work is not easy in that little space, but our ancestors were able to do it. Okay, so now we come to Tibet, finally, Bengal theke. So I'll shorten my history of Tibet because I do not simply have the time. Let's just say in Tibet, Buddhism came into 2 phases. Okay, the first phase happened during the reign of these 3 Dharma kings. Okay, just Songtsen Gampo, Tisong Detsen, and Ralpachen. You can look at their time periods like around 9th century. So under them, Buddhism was introduced into Tibet. The Tibetan script was developed to translate Sanskrit text, and the first contact was situated. But then during the time of Tisong Detsen, the second Dharma king, he invited 2 figures, very important, Shantarokshit and Padmasambhav. Padmasambhav is still very major figure in Tibetan Buddhism. He's called the second Buddha or Guru Rinpoche. Sikkim, there's a huge statue of Padmasambhava. So Padmasambhava was a tantric master who subdued the local Boon deity. So Tibet's own original religion was called Boon religion. So Padmasambhava symbolically or really defeated the demons of the Boon religion and helped Shantarakshita, who's by the way a Bengali monk, to establish the first monastery in Tibet, which is the Samye monastery. And Shantarakshit is essentially also Atisha's ancestor. Okay, so anyway, just anecdotes. Anyway, so after Ralpachan, there comes a dark period in Tibetan history when this king Langdarma, he was a very violent persecutor of Buddhism. So under him, Tibet breaks down into smaller factions. He's basically assassinated, and Tibet breaks down into smaller principalities, and Buddhism basically goes into background. During the time of the 3 Dharma kings, Tibet used to control a large section of China. Okay, so this will be relevant when you go to the painting. And then during Langdarma's time, Buddhism basically took a back seat. And what happened? Buddhist knowledge was lost in Tibet. Okay, so this is the Samye monastery, which is changed after many modifications, but this was modeled on Vikramshila Mahavihar in Bihar. So this is probably what Vikramshila looked like minus the Tibetan ornamentation. And yeah, so this is Samye, and this is Guru Rinpoche, the tantric master. As you can see, there are these Boon deities lying prone on the ground, defeated by Padmasambhava by his fire. And this is King Tisong Detsen, who's basically welcoming Padmasambhava and Buddhism into Tibet. Okay, and incidentally, we have almost no art during this period. Okay, during this time, Buddhism was a court religion. It was not widespread. And we do not have except these few murals from what is now China called Danwang. So this is probably, you can look at go Danwang art. There are these beautiful caves, sealed caves full of books. And there this can be said this early Tibetan art, which looks a little Chinese. So basically, because Chinese art was more prevalent during that time because Tibet had conquered China. And this is the Jokhang Buddha, which is the holiest Buddha statue in Tibet. So basically, Songtsen Gampo, the first Tibetan Buddhist king, he had two wives, the Nepali wife and the Chinese wife. So this shows the two strands of Buddhism. The Nepali wife brought her Buddhism, the Chinese wife brought her Buddhism, and the Chinese wife brought the statue of the Jokhang Buddha, which is said to be a true likeness of Gautama Buddha, which comes from apparently from Bodh Gaya, but then you know how myths multiply. But this is the holiest statue of Buddha in Tibet, the Jokhang Buddha. Very beautiful. Then for us, the most important or the important part is the second wave of Buddhism, when the persecution of Buddhism ended and Buddhists renewed their contact with Eastern India. This is when the Pala Empire was at its peak. And this is when Atish Dipankar was invited to come to Tibet. And Atish Dipankar essentially was a pioneer because he's one of the first people who came to Tibet. And after Atish Dipankar, till pretty much 14th, 15th century, even after the Buddhist institutions have fallen in Eastern India, we have Buddhist teachers coming to Tibet, and with the new advances in Buddhism. So remember, between this first phase and the second phase, the later tantric texts have developed. We have looked at, so they bring all of that. And yeah, so this is Atish Dipankar. And when Atish traveled with a lot of artifacts, and he might have statues with him, he might have paintings with him, he might have artists traveling with him, and with him, now the Tibetans, once they have re-established their connection to Tibet, to India, they now wanted to do things the right way, and the right way for them would be the Pala school of art. So this starts the period where Tibetans basically consider the Eastern style or the Pala style of art as a hallmark for producing art. This is also incidentally a very old Tibetan portrait of Atish Dipankar. It is created in 14th century, but it has all the hallmarks of Pala art. I'll talk about that. So the Tibetan art during this time has these three schools. We'll just not go a lot into these schools because they're very tiny, minute differences that I'd rather show you paintings. So this is from the first stage, which is very Pal. So again, if you remember the register style, where there is this portion separated at the top and bottom. So at the top you have the gurus. So this is how we look at a Tibetan painting. The top register is usually occupied by the lineage gurus, because in Tantra, guru is more important than the deity. So the guru, the lineage of the guru parampara is always on the top. Then you have the main figure. This is Vajrasattva, who is the tantric deity of purification, and the very Pala lotus, because the lotus of the Pala era looks exactly like this. The later Thangkas, the modern Thangkas, the lotuses look more like Chinese lotuses. And there is a Shingashon, literally a Shingashon with shingos. The Pala artist took the term Shingashon very literally with shingos here. And the bottom you have other deities. So this is a painting. This is a Maha Vajradhatu Vairochana, again done in the Pala style. Again, you can see the register style done here with the gurus and Buddhas on top, and the other deities at the bottom, and a lotus base and a Singhasana. And if you look at the faces are the biggest indicators of where I think a painting is from, because etar mukh boঝা যাচ্ছে না, but these faces are very Indian. When Tibetan art, becomes more and more Tibetanized, the faces change to look more Tibetan. But at this point, okay, so this painting is very important. I will present this painting in a lot of detail because this is one of the masterworks of Tibetan art. Again, possibly done by an Bengali or East Indian artist. And I have my reasons in telling why. So just a second, I'll have to find this painting. I have it open somewhere. Okay, can't find it, but I'll be able to find it soon. Just give me a moment. Okay, so I'll present something again because I'm trying to hurry up now because I think I'll run out of time. So this is around 1200, so 13th century. So first of all, the detail is spellbinding, the minute work. This is also Ashtomahabhaya Tara, and the 8 taras are done in tiny, minute details in the pillar. Okay, you can see the taras here. And again, this shrine, this throne-like, this temple-like structure is very, very Pala, as I've already said. Tibetans actually do not paint in this temple structure. So this temple structure is the first sort of indication that this is done possibly by a Bengali artist or a Tibetan artist who was trained in Bengal, or a Nepali artist who was trained in Bengal. Okay, we really can speculate at this point. And another feature here, মানে দুর্গা পুজো আসছে, দুর্গা পুজোর নবপত্রিকা পুজো হয়, তেমন here the trees, they are not random trees. These trees actually botanically correspond with actual trees that you find in East India. So this is botgach, essentially banyan tree. These are coconuts. There is basically Ashok. This is Ashok tree, which is very okay. I think this is basically Ashok tree. Just a second, I lost the tab. There's Ashok tree, and this is Kathal gach. Okay, this is jackfruit tree, as you can understand. Okay, and there is jackfruit. There is mango tree. Oh no, I think jayok ekta mango, ekta jackfruit basically. But you get my point, and this is probably lychee tree. So basically, Tibetan, Nepal, these trees don't grow. Okay, so I mean, and to get this amount of botanical accuracy, you have to, I mean, I've seen these trees in person. So, and this is of course Bodhi Brikho on top, symbolizing Tara's Bodhi, and otherwise also this is beautiful. And I mean, so yeah, so possibly done by a Bengali artist. And again, the Shinga shown with shingos literally and hathis here. Just take a moment to appreciate the very minute details of this painting. It is spellbinding work. But there are also a few Nepali features. For example, a full-length shari is a very Nepali Tibetan feature, because most of Pal deities do not. They wear transparent sharis. At least just Komorer areata would be a little opaque. Otherwise, it's essentially transparent. So this is, we do not know who painted it, but it is a mixture, and this is a transition from the Pal style to a more clearer Tibetan style. So this is done later on. Okay, so now let us quickly see a few Tibetan paintings, and then we can wrap up our discussion. This is another Vajrashatto. I'll talk about a few specified paintings. These are 2 Vajra Barahis, essentially from, again, I'll show a few other paintings. These are done in Pal style. Again, you can, so basically what happens in Tibetan painting later on, আমরা এখন Tibetan thanka বলতে যেগুলো বুঝি, open skies, flowers, open background. The Pal paintings are not in an open background, and there is a predominance of the use of red. You'll see red is the dominant color. And these are pictures of Vajrabarahi, again done in very Pal style, but these are done in Tibet. Now we are securely in Tibetan territory. Now there are no debates as to whether Indian or Tibetan. So I'll analyze a few of these paintings. So this is so Vajrabarahi is a Dakini. She is the highest yoga tantra deity. And this is again her mandala. If you are initiated into the mandala, you would be able to essentially use this painting to do your meditation. Okay, so gurus, as I said, had become very important in Tibet, in Vajrayana Buddhism, and in Tibet, because the original gurus were all from India, there was a renewed need to have guru portraits all the time. So the guru portraits, so these are lineage portraits or guru portraits, where you have the founder of a lineage in the middle, so actual human beings in the middle, with other lineage masters and other deities. For example, the guru is here. This is the line of descent. I'm not going into this. This is Shakyamuni Buddha. This is Vajradhar Buddha. So this is the line of descent of this particular lineage of Buddhism. So and this is a double portrait in the sense this signifies a lineage on left, this signifies a lineage on the right. So duto lineage, this guru holds these two lineages. Here are these two tiny deities which are the main practices, again Hebajra and Chakrashambar, which I've talked about. And these are other deities. So each lineage has a set of deities. Shop lineage, shop deity practice kore na. Some lineages are focused on particular deities. So this lineage picture gives you a complete picture of a religious system. And looking at it, you can just remember your affiliations essentially. This is also a picture of a guru surrounded by the Indian Mahasiddhas. So the Indian Mahasiddhas, there are 84 of them, but there are 8 important ones. There are the 8 ones here. We'll not go into this. This is Nagarjuna. Anyway. Okay. So this is a mandala. Again, this is a Tibetan mandala. Again, you need to know initiator to talk about this mandala, but I wanted to show this picture. This painting again falls under the doubtful Pala or Tibetan category because the face is very Tibetan. It is done in register style. And if you look at the jewelries are the biggest indicator that these are Bengali or East Indian. Also, East Indian deities have a balish behind them. Mane amra hajar bochor dhori amra aram priyo. Even the deities pechone balish na thakle soja hoye darate pare, boshte pare or something like that. So the Bengali, sort of paintings always have this pillow against whom it was balish, against whom the deity rests essentially. That is another feature that the Tibetans discard. Oraonic hardy race. I don't think they need balish like us. Anyway, I'm joking, but you get the point. And okay. Now I want to show a few pictures in terms of change that happens from India to Tibet. This is again done that early Pala influenced. You can see the difference. The deities look different. The fire is different. Here, this figure is in outside setting, Vajrapani. This is Vajrapani. So Vajrapani, this is a Tibetan, the right one. He is out in the open sky. But here, he's still out in the open sky. There are trees here, but the treatment is much darker. He's black here, he's blue, because these deities are actually black. But black is very difficult to paint. If you paint, you will see if your central figure is completely black, it creates a lot of problems visually to establish the painting. So the Tibetans shift to a more vibrant blue. So the Tibetan shift in painting is basically open spaces. And the shape of the lotus also changes. The lotus becomes more peony or lily-like, following the Chinese convention basically. So, and the deity becomes blue from black. So these are the changes that happen from the early Pala examples to later. This is very recent, but I wanted to show a comparison. This is again a Pala-inspired lineage portrait. You have gurus, and this is how the Tibetans do modern lineage portrait. So itake refuge tree bole. This is basically a complete system. This is Lama Tsongkhapa, the Tibetan one. He is the founder of the Gelug school. Not founder, he's the forefather of Gelug school of Buddhism, which is Dalai Lama's school. And here you have pretty much all the important gurus and everyone, and you have all the deities, and it's out in the open, floating in the clouds. The Pala paintings are always, there's a sense of being indoors. There is not much nature. But the Tibetans, I think because of the plateaus and the mountains and their beautiful landscape, they incorporate a lot of nature into their paintings. Again, this is a Pala era Vajravarahi. This is a Tibetan Vajravarahi. Here, Vajravarahi is out in the open. You can see the changes in her hairstyle. You can see the change in the fire. So you can see the overall shift. And the register style is abandoned here. In the Pala style, you have line all the gurus arranged one after the other. And here you will see the gurus are placed here in a more floating, in a more sort of open fashion. So the Pala paintings give a sense of more enclosed, compact deities. The Tibetan paintings give a more wide open. Sometimes when I look at the Tibetan paintings, I main deity ta dekhte bhule jai, ami pechoner phool gachgulo appreciate kori because they take you to Tibet, literally. So that way Tibetans were able to implant their own land into their paintings. Okay, so I think this is all I had to show basically. And this is a book cover from Tibet. I wanted to make a point, but now I have lost the original slide, but this is a Tibetan book cover. And yeah, so this is the end of my slide. I have tried to show basically the evolution of Tibetan paintings from Pala era paintings. And what I basically want, or what I basically feel like, that as Bengalis, as East Indians, we perhaps need to be aware of our own heritage and bring these idioms back into our painting, which will only enrich us and basically create a sense of continuity in our own very rich painting and cultural tradition. So that was it. Thank you very much. And I'll take questions now if there are any.
ধন্যবাদ কুশ, অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ। একটা অসাধারণ পাণ্ডিত্যপূর্ণ বক্তব্য শুধু নয়, তার সঙ্গে সঙ্গে যেটা আমরা পেলাম যে আমাদের নিজেদের হেরিটেজ, নিজেদের ট্র্যাডিশন যেটা অপেক্ষাকৃত কম আলোচিত, তার উপরে একটা দারুণ আলোকপাত হলো আজকে।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
এখন এই প্ল্যাটফর্মটা আমরা ইন্টারাকশনের জন্য ওপেন করছি। যে কোনো ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজে কোয়েশ্চেন করা যেতে পারে। অনুরোধ করছি সুধীরঞ্জন মুখার্জি মহাশয় রয়েছেন, উনি যদি কোনো মন্তব্য বা প্রশ্ন করেন।
বাবারে, আমি জানতাম।
সুধীরঞ্জন বাবু।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, আমি আজকে আসলে অনলাইন ক্লাস থাকার জন্য 8টার অনেক পরে জয়েন করেছি, তাও শেষেরটুকু শুনেছি, ভীষণ ভালো লেগেছে। আর আমার টিবেটান পেন্টিং আমার অত্যন্ত প্রিয়। তার কারণ হচ্ছে ওর যে ডেকোরেটিভ যে দিকটা থাকে, ডেকোরেটিভ কোয়ালিটি যে দিকটা থাকে, সেটা আমাকে খুব মুগ্ধ করে বরাবরই। যদিও আমার এই আজকের থেকেই, বক্তৃতা থেকেই আমি অনেকটা তবু শেষের দিকে হলেও বেশ খানিকটা জানতে পারলাম। আর মানে পাল যুগের চিত্রকলা এবং টিবেটান পেন্টিং এর মধ্যে যে মিল এবং অমিল যেখানে, সেই জায়গাটাও খুব ভালো সুন্দরভাবে উনি বলেছেন। আর ছবিগুলো দেখতেও আমার ভীষণ ভালো লেগেছে, সেই হিসেবে খুবই ভালো লেগেছে, মুগ্ধ আমি। কিন্তু আমি চেষ্টা করব যাতে ইউটিউবের যখন এইটা বেরোবে আমি পুরোটা শুনে নিয়ে আর একটু ভালো করে বলতে পারবো।
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ।
ঠিক আছে।
আচ্ছা, যারা হ্যান্ড রাইজ করেছেন, প্রথমে শর্মিষ্ঠা সর্দার।
আচ্ছা, একজন কমেন্টে লিখেছেন যে দ্য সেকেন্ডারি সোর্সেস ইয়েট আইড লাভ টু, এন্ড মানে ইফ একটু টাইম লাগে আপনি আমাকে পার্সোনালিও, আমি তো গ্রুপে আছি, পিং করতে পারেন। আই ক্যান প্রোভাইড ইউ দ্য রেফারেন্সেস। মানে আমি খুব তাড়াতাড়ি পিপিটি করেছি, বাট আই হ্যাভ দ্য রেফারেন্সেস উইথ মি এন্ড আইড বি হ্যাপি টু শেয়ার দেম। থ্যাংক ইউ।
হ্যান্ড রেজ করেছিলেন শর্মিষ্ঠা সর্দার, আপনার যদি কিছু বলার থাকে।
আসলে এটা যদি কোনো লিখিত আকারে আমি পাই, মানে আমরা পাই, তাহলে খুব ভালো হয়, কারণ উনি এত তাড়াতাড়ি স্পিডে বলে গিয়েছেন, সবসময় ফলো করতে পারিনি ঠিক, মানে ট্রুলি স্পিকিং।
আমার লিখিত নেই স্যাডলি, বাট আমি সেকেন্ডারি সোর্সেস দিতে পারি। মানে সেকেন্ডারি, আই এম সরি, মানে আমার এতটা কভার করার ছিল, আমি হয়তো একটু তাড়াতাড়ি বলে ফেলেছি, অ্যাপোলোজাইজ ফর দ্যাট। বাট আমি সেকেন্ডারি সোর্সেস দিয়ে দিতে পারি, বিকজ লেখা ছিল না, আমি তো মানে থেকে বললাম, মানে নিজের থেকে। সো সরি ইফ ইট ওয়াজ আ
বিবলিওগ্রাফি যদি পাওয়া যায় আর কি।
ডেফিনেটলি আইল ট্রাই টু ডু দ্যাট।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
হ্যান্ড রেজ করেছেন পিয়ালি সরকার। পিয়ালি সরকার, পিয়ালি সরকার আছেন? বেশ। নীনা ঘোষ হ্যান্ড রেজ করেছেন, প্লিজ।
হ্যাঁ, মীনা ঘোষ, গভর্নমেন্ট কলেজ অফ আর্ট অ্যান্ড ক্রাফট, কলকাতা। আমার অনেকগুলো প্রশ্নই ছিল, কিন্তু আমি জানি সময় সংক্ষেপ আর আমার প্রতিদিনই একটু দেরি হয়ে যায়, কিন্তু অ্যাকচুয়ালি আই এম ভেরি ইন্টারেস্টেড। কিন্তু আমি জাস্ট দুটো এখন খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট, তার মধ্যে একটা আমার অ্যাডিশন আছে। প্রথমে হচ্ছে যে আপনি 4টে টার্মিনোলজি ইউজ করছেন, যেগুলোতে একটু প্রোনাউন্সিয়েশনটা একটু কারেকশন দরকার। একটা হচ্ছে বর্তন, ইট উইল বি বর্তনা। দেন অষ্ট সহস্রিকা প্রজ্ঞা পারমিতা নয়, অষ্ট সাহস্রিকা প্রজ্ঞা পারমিতা। তারপরে আরেকটা ছিল মহাময়ূরী, না, ইট উইল বি মহামায়ুরী, মহামায়ুরী। হ্যাঁ, শুনতে পাচ্ছি না, প্লিজ।
না দাঁড়ান, সুধীর বাবুর মানে মাইকটা অন আছে। বলুন।
মহাময়ূরী শব্দটা রবীন্দ্রনাথ ব্যবহার করেছেন।
এটা মহাময়ূরী, কিন্তু ময়ূর থেকে এসছে, আমি যতদূর জানি।
আপনি আমার কমেন্টটা, আমার রেফারেন্সটা আপনি রিলাই করতে পারেন। আমি এই বিষয়েরই একজন স্টুডেন্ট। আপনি যদি কোনো অরিজিনাল টেক্সটে যান, দেখবেন একটা আয়ের ওপরে একটা লং ভাউল সাউন্ড বোঝাতে একটা হরাইজন্টাল বার থাকে, এবং গ্রামাটিক্যালিও আপনি যদি যান, মহা যখন ময়ূর এই অরিজিনাল যে ওয়ার্ডটা থেকে এসেছে, তখন ওটাতে একটা আকার আসবার কথা আর কি। আমি এটাকে আমার একটা কি বলবো স্টাডি থেকেই আপনাকে বললাম যে রবীন্দ্রনাথ উল্লেখ করলে এটা হবে মায়ূরী। অ্যান্ড দেন দুনহুয়াং আর ডানহুয়াং বলেছেন, অ্যাকচুয়ালি দুটো শব্দই হয়। আগে জানেন চাইনিজ টার্মগুলো একটু ভ্যারি করে, কিছুদিন সময় অন্তর বদলে যায়। এই যে আগে বলা হতো এটাকে তুনহুয়াং, এখন দুনহুয়াং বলা হয়, দুনহুয়াং বা তুনহুয়াং। এটা একটা সিল্ক রুটের ওপর একটা বড় কেভ, যেটা অরেলস্টাইন এক্সকাভেট করে বের করেছিলেন। এখানে প্রচুর আর্টিফ্যাক্টস পাওয়া গেছে, যার মধ্যে 1000 বুদ্ধ কেভ একটা খুব ইম্পর্টেন্ট। এবং এটাতে ম্যাক্সিমাম যে আর্টিস্টিক যে স্টাইল আমরা পাই, সেটাতে মনে করা হয়, আমিও এই ফিল্ডের একজন পড়াশোনা করার লোক বলে আপনি আমার কথাটা রিলাই করতে পারেন।
না নিশ্চয়ই,
এটাতে চাইনিজ ইনফ্লুয়েন্সের চেয়েও অনেক বেশি টিবেটান ইনফ্লুয়েন্স ছিল বলেই মনে করা হয়, এবং এটা 10th-11th সেঞ্চুরির মধ্যে তৈরি হয়। এবার অনেকগুলো কোয়েশ্চেন, আমি আপনার কন্টাক্ট নাম্বার নিয়ে পরে আপনার সঙ্গে কথা বলবো, যেহেতু এই বিষয়ে আমার কতগুলো ক্লারিফিকেশনও আছে। আমার ক্লারিফিকেশন আছে অনেকগুলো, এবং কতগুলো আমার কাউন্টার করারও আছে। তার মধ্যে একটা আপনাকে আমি, যেটা আজকে এইটের সেশনটার জন্য খুব জরুরি, সেটা বলবো যে বৌদ্ধ ধর্ম 7th সেঞ্চুরির পরে ইস্টার্ন ইন্ডিয়াতে, যখন 7th সেঞ্চুরিতে গাম্পোর পরে প্রথম টিবেটান রাজা হিসেবে গাম্পো বৌদ্ধ ধর্ম সম্পর্কে জানবার জন্যে ভারতবর্ষে তার পাঠাবেন, এবং তারপরে গোটা ইস্টার্ন ইন্ডিয়ান যে কালচার এবং বুদ্ধিজম সম্পর্কিত তথ্য সব যাবে, এবং তখনই ওদের প্রথম ওরা ওরাল সোসাইটি থেকে ভার্বাল সোসাইটিতে, এবং ওদের তখন প্রথম স্ক্রিপ্ট তৈরি হবে, যেটা পুরোটা ইন্ডিয়ান ব্রাহ্মী থেকে, সেই সময় 7th সেঞ্চুরি ব্রাহ্মী থেকে ওদের স্ক্রিপ্ট তৈরি হবে, টিবেটান স্ক্রিপ্ট প্রথম। তারপরে আমি খুব ছোট করে বলছি, যেটা যে আপনার ইয়েতে আমি পেলাম না, সেটা হচ্ছে ভীষণ ইম্পর্টেন্ট। পালো যে তান্ত্রিক বুদ্ধিজম, এই তন্ত্র কিন্তু তখনও ভারতবর্ষে ইস্টার্ন ইন্ডিয়াতে কেন অন্য কোনো রিজিয়নেই নেই। এবং আমরা যে
এটা কিন্তু ঠিক নয়, কেননা প্রথম ডিফিউশনে গুহ্যগর্ভ তন্ত্র গেছে, তন্ত্র ছিল 100 বার ছিল। মঞ্জুশ্রী মূলকল্প ইজ অ্যান আর্লি তন্ত্র, সো তন্ত্র ছিল না সেটাই না। হ্যাঁ, মোনাস্টিসিজম প্রথম দিকে জোর দেওয়া ছিল, কিন্তু তন্ত্রের দুটো এখনো টিবেটে তন্ত্রের দুটো আছে। নিংমা স্কুল, যেটা ওল্ড স্কুল, যেটা ফার্স্ট ডিফিউশনে আছে, তারা গুহ্যগর্ভ তন্ত্র ফলো করে, সেটা কিন্তু তন্ত্র, সেটা সেই সময়তেই নিংমা স্কুলে গেছে। এবং তারপরে সারমা তন্ত্রগুলো চক্রসম্বর, হেবজ্র ইত্যাদি ইত্যাদি গেছে। তন্ত্র ছিল নাটা একটু হিস্টোরিক্যাল হয়ে যাবে।
আমি যেটা এক্স্যাক্টলি বলতে চাইছি, যেটা বইতে আছে, আমি যেগুলো রিলায়েবল বুকস যেগুলো বলে যে তন্ত্র, যেমন আমাদের যে ব্রাহ্মণিকাল তান্ত্রিজম ছিল, সেটাও ছিল বলা হয়, কিন্তু সেগুলোর রেফারেন্স যেগুলো বা যাকে রিটিন টেক্সট আমাদের কাছে এই সময়টাতে প্রুফ করার মতো কিছু ছিল না। কিন্তু পালো সেন যুগে যে আমরা 3টে সেক্ট, যেটা মহাযান থেকে ডেভেলপ করবে, বজ্রযান, কালচক্রযান অ্যান্ড পরে সহজযান, যেটা এই 3টে, এবং তারপরে ইসলামিক ইনভেশনের পরে এটা ভারত থেকে একেবারেই কি বলে এলিমিনেটেড হয়ে যাবে এবং ওয়াইপড আউট হয়ে যাবে। এই যে প্রথম বজ্রযান যে তান্ত্রিক ডিটিজ আমরা পালসেন যুগের ম্যানাস্ক্রিপ্টে প্রথম দেখব, সেইটা কিন্তু তান্ত্রিক যে বুদ্ধিজম, যেটা তারনাথের থেকে মেনলি পাওয়া যায় 10th সেঞ্চুরি, মনে করে আপনি 15 বললেন
না, তারনাথ 10th সেঞ্চুরি নয়। তারনাথ কিন্তু ইন্ডিয়ায় বুদ্ধিজম করার অনেক পরে লিখেছেন, সুতরাং তারনাথের ন্যারেটিভ খুব একটা একদমই রিলায়েবল নয়। কিন্তু তারনাথ যখন লিখছেন তখন ইন্ডিয়ার বুদ্ধিজম ভ্যানিশ হয়ে গেছে, এইটা আপনি দেখে নিন, এইটা আমি শিওর। তারনাথ 10th সেঞ্চুরি নয়, তারনাথ 14th, তারনাথ অনেক পরে। তারনাথ যখন লিখছেন ইন্ডিয়ায় বুদ্ধিজম ডিস্ট্রয় হয়ে গেছে। এবং তার প্রথম কথা, তারনাথের অ্যাকাউন্ট শুড বি টেকেন উইথ আ পিঞ্চ অফ সল্ট। উনি যখন লিখছেন তখন তখন দ্য বুদ্ধিস্ট কালচার ইন ইন্ডিয়া হ্যাজ এন্ডেড, এবং ওনার অনেক কিছু আছে যা কোরোবোরেট করা যায় না। এবং সহজযান একটা অনেক লেটার ডেভেলপমেন্ট, এবং কালচক্রযানকে একটা সেপারেট যান আমি বলবো না, কেননা কারেন্ট টিবেটান স্টাডিজে কালচক্রকে আলাদা করে ধরা হয় না। আমার নলেজটা এখানে বইতে হয়তো হ্যাঁ কালচক্রযান আলাদা, বিকজ কালচক্রযান একটা তন্ত্রের পুরো আলাদা ওয়ার্ল্ড বিল্ডিং সিস্টেম তৈরি করে, কিন্তু টিবেটানরা কালচক্রযানকে আলাদা করে কিছু দেখে না। তো সেটা তাদের একদম সারমা, তারা দুটো পরিষ্কার তন্ত্রকে দুটো ভাগে দেখে টিবেটের, একটা হচ্ছে নিংমা যেটা হচ্ছে প্রথম 3 ধর্মা কিংস, আর সেকেন্ড সারমা যেটা সব আসে পালসেন যুগে আর কি। সুতরাং মানে আপনি যেগুলো বলছেন সবই আমি মানছি, কিন্তু আমার মনে হয় ফর্মুলেশনে একটু আলাদা, মানে দুটো কিন্তু এসেনশিয়ালি ইজ দ্য সেম থিং। বাট বাট এনিওয়ে বলুন আপনি, আমি সরি টু ইন্টারাপ্ট ইউ, প্লিজ বলুন।
আমিও একজন কি বলে পালসেন্য যুগের আর্টের উপরে আমার নিজস্ব একটা কাজও ছিল, এবং যারা মেইনলি যারা এক্সপোনেন্ট এই আর্টের ব্যাপারে একটা হচ্ছে সরস্বতী কুমার সরস্বতী, এবং তার আগে আর যারা আছেন তাদের মধ্যে আমি যাচ্ছি না, কিন্তু মেইনলি যিনি এই জিনিসটাকে মানে যে তান্ত্রিক বুদ্ধিস্ট যে আর্ট যেটাকে উনি এস্টাবলিশ করেছেন, দুটো বই ওনার, একটা পাল যুগের চিত্রকলা, আর্ট হচ্ছে তন্ত্রযান আর্ট, এশিয়াটিক সোসাইটি থেকে বেরিয়েছে সেখানে, সেটা থেকে। এবং আর যারা হিস্টোরিয়ান ইস্ট ইন্ডিয়ান স্কুল যেটাকে আপনি রেফারও করেছেন, সেটাকে সেখানে যে তান্ত্রিক যে ম্যানিফেস্টেশন আমরা দেখি, সেটা কিন্তু এই পালসেন ইলাস্ট্রেশন বা পালসেন মিনিয়েচার স্কুলের আগে কোনো রিপ্রেজেন্টেশন আমরা পাই না। এবং সেটার এখানে মনে করা হয়, আমার এরকমই পড়া আছে, যদি গত 10 বছরে কোনো আলাদা কোনো রিসার্চ না হয়ে থেকে থাকে, তাহলে যে তান্ত্রিক রেফারেন্সেস বা রিপ্রেজেন্টেশন আমরা পালসেন ম্যানুস্ক্রিপ্টে পাই, সেটা তিব্বতে যে বৌদ্ধ ধর্ম 7ম শতকের পরে গিয়েছিল, সেখান থেকে এই তান্ত্রিক ইনফিউশনটা আবার 8th 9th এর মধ্যে পালদের সময়ে ভারতবর্ষে এবং মেনলি ইস্টার্ন ইন্ডিয়াতে এটা ইনফিউজড হয়ে এসেছিল, এবং তারই রিপ্রেজেন্টেশন আমরা এই বৌদ্ধ ধর্মে ইস্টার্ন ইন্ডিয়ান স্কুলের মধ্যে পাই। এটা 10 বছরে যে বললাম, যদি
আমার জাস্ট একটা কথা বলার আছে যে আপনি খুব ভালো লাগছে, কিন্তু সময় আমাদের খুব সংক্ষিপ্ত।
আমি সেই জন্য ওইটুকু বলেই রাখছি।
ম্যাডাম প্লিজ আমরা আলাদা কথা বলবো, অফকোর্স
আলাদা করে
অনেক শেখার আছে,
যান খুব ভালো হয়।
ঠিক আছে, আমি থ্যাংক ইউ।
হ্যাঁ, আইতা বিশ্বাস পাল, আপনি হ্যান্ড রেজ করেছিলেন। আইতা বিশ্বাস পাল, আর ইউ প্রেজেন্ট? হ্যাঁ, শি ইজ প্রেজেন্ট। ঋষিতা গুপ্ত বক্সী, প্লিজ।
হ্যাঁ, প্রথমেই একটা অসম্ভব মনোগ্রাহী আলোচনার জন্য ধন্যবাদ। আর নিশ্চয়ই আমরা যোগাযোগ করে আরো জানতে পারবো।
নিশ্চয়ই, মাই প্লেজার।
হ্যাঁ, আমার অ্যাকচুয়ালি যেটা জানার ছিল সেটা হচ্ছে যে এই যে রঙের ব্যবহারের জায়গাটাতে লাল এবং সবুজ, লাল যদি তন্ত্রের সূত্রে ধরেও থাকি, সবুজ এই রঙের যে এটা কি সুলভে পাওয়া যাচ্ছে, এটা কি অ্যাভেলেবিলিটির জন্য নাকি এটা একেবারে ধর্মীয় দিক থেকে দেখা?
না দেখুন, ধর্মীয় দিক থেকে শুধু যে ডেটিগুলোর শরীর এবং তাদের গয়না, পেছন মানে ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড করার মধ্যে লাল সবুজের কোনো সেই অর্থে কোনো রিলিজিয়াস সিগনিফিকেন্স নেই। তবে হ্যাঁ, এই ডেটিদের হেলোগুলো ইউজুয়ালি লাল করা হতো, তো সেখানে অ্যাভেলেবিলিটি আর আমার মনে হয় কালার স্কিমের ওপরই, মানে সেইটাই, ওই ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ডের ইউজে কোনো ধর্মীয় ইয়ে নেই, শুধু ডেটিদের ফিগারে মানে বিভিন্ন কালার। কারণ ডেটিদের ওই 5টা রং হয় তন্ত্রে, 5টা রং, 5টা আমাদের ক্লেশকে ইন্ডিকেট করে, যেগুলোকে আমরা তন্ত্রের মাধ্যমে পিউরিফাই করে হায়ার কোয়ালিটিস করতে পারি আর কি। তাছাড়া ওটা জাস্ট লালটার ইউজ, হ্যাঁ সহজলভ্য বলে লালটা, এবং লালটা খুব হাই কন্ট্রাস্টে সেট করে অ্যাস্থেটিক পয়েন্ট অফ টু দ্য ডেটিজ আর কি। এবং লাল এবং সবুজ কমপ্লিমেন্টারি কালার্স, মানে এটা সম্পূর্ণ আমার অবজারভেশন, কিন্তু লাল আর সবুজ তো কমপ্লিমেন্টারি কালার্স, তো সেখানে লাল হেলো এবং বাইরে সবুজ নেচার এবং হ্যালো, আই থিংক ক্রিয়েট নাইস কন্ট্রাস্ট আর কি। এটা আমার ব্যক্তিগত সম্পূর্ণ অ্যাস্থেটিক অবজারভেশন আর কি, এটার কোনো
হ্যাঁ, আরেকটা জিনিস হচ্ছে যেটা দেখছিলাম যেখানে প্রজ্ঞাপারামিতারই একটা ছবি, যে নিচে অনেক জীবজন্তুর ছবি রয়েছে, বাঘ, হাতি, তারপরে অন্যান্য মস্তক রয়েছে, পাশে শিয়ালের মতন লাগলো আমার। আমি ঠিক হ্যাঁ,
কোন স্লাইডটা একটু আপনার মনে আছে? মানে
যেখানে একেবারে শেষের দিকে আপনি টিবেটান যেখানে দেখাচ্ছেন ছবিতে রয়েছে অনেক পশুর ছবি রয়েছে, বাঁ দিকে হাতির ছবি রয়েছে, বাঘেরও একটা ছবি আছে, কিন্তু পাশে তার পাশে দুদিকেই রয়েছে একটা শৃগালের মতন লাগলো আমার। হ্যাঁ, তো সেইটা আমি একটু মনে করছিলাম যে
আচ্ছা আমি এক সেকেন্ড, আমি কুইকলি একটু কারণ দেখাই কোন ইমেজটা সুবিধা হবে, কারণ আমি কোনো রিকল করতে পারছি না, সরি একটু টাইম লেগে যাচ্ছে।
আমরা একটু পরে গ্রুপেও আলোচনা করতে পারি, কারণ আরো অনেকে প্রশ্ন।
আপনি যদি তাড়াতাড়ি একটু দেখেন কোনটা আর কি, তাহলে আমি বলতে পারবো।
আমি মানে স্ক্রিনশটও নিলাম, আমি গ্রুপে বলে দেবো।
আচ্ছা আমার গ্রুপে বলবেন, আমি না বুঝতে পারছি না কোন পেইন্টিংটা অ্যাকচুয়ালি, সরি।
একটু কথা বলছি হিসিতা, আমার ওটা মনে হচ্ছে শৃগাল না, ড্রাগনের মতো, মানে ওই যে সরি
একটু কি
সি হর্সের মতো।
একটু কি গ্রুপে পাঠাবেন এক্ষুনি, আমি তাহলে স্ক্রিনশটটা দেখতে পারি।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, সি হর্সের মতন একটা ইমেজ।
দাঁড়ান, হ্যাঁ আচ্ছা, এটা কি ওই পেছনে সিংহাসনের পেছনে ছিল?
না, ওই পায়ের দিকে বাঁ দিকে ছিল, ডান দিকেও ছিল।
আমায় যদি একটু গ্রুপে পাঠান আমি এক্ষুনি দেখে বলে দিতে পারি।
আচ্ছা
এইটা ঠিক আছে। আচ্ছা, আর অন্যরা আছেন, তাদেরও প্রশ্ন আছে, আমি সময় নেব না।
ভালো পাঠান, আমি দেখছি। থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ, থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ।
ঋতুপর্ণা বাসু, প্লিজ।
Let me congratulate you on a very illustrative, exhaustive and wonderful lecture.
Thank you so much.
I just want to go beyond the realm of art history and ask a bit about the historical creation of this narrative of Brihad Bongo. হ্যাঁ, এই যে ইস্টার্ন ট্রেডিশন সেট আপ হচ্ছে, এই যে বাংলা থেকে যাচ্ছে টিবেটে, যেটা এটা অঙ্গ আর কি। তো জাস্ট টু পুট ইন আ থিং, যে এই 30-এর দশকে দীনেশচন্দ্র সেন, নিহাররঞ্জন রায়, এরা কিন্তু যে ইতিহাসটা ক্রিয়েট করছে বাংলার, মানে বাংলা থেকে সব চলে যাচ্ছে, হ্যাঁ এই ধরনের একটা ইতিহাস আছে। এবারে স্টেলা ক্র্যামরিশ যখন পরে লিখছে, উনি কিন্তু, আমার এটা একটা প্রশ্নই আপনার কাছে, কারণ আমি এই জায়গাটা কোনো কিছু জানি না, উনি কিন্তু বলছেন একটা আর্ট অফ নেপাল একটা ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্ট ট্রেডিশন হিসেবে গ্রো করছে। হ্যাঁ, তো এই যে বাংলা থেকে টিবেটে যাওয়ার পথে কি নেপালেরও নিজস্বতা একটা আছে যেটা টিবেটে গিয়েছিল?
হ্যাঁ, আমি অ্যাকচুয়ালি নেপালটা বলিনি, নেপাল বললে আরো আমার 3 ঘন্টা লাগতো এবং আরো পড়াশোনা করতে লাগতো, কিন্তু নেপাল বাদ দিয়ে আলোচনাটা হয় না। ইটস আ ট্রায়াঙ্গেল অ্যাকচুয়ালি। এবং যখন বেঙ্গলে পাল শেষ হয়ে যায়, অল দি অ্যাটেলিয়ার্স, অল দ্য স্টুডিওস ক্লোজ ডাউন, তখন টিবেটানসরা নেপালিদের কাছে ছোটে, কারণ নেপাল হ্যাড আ মোর ডাইরেক্ট অ্যান্ড মোর এনশিয়েন্ট কন্ট্যাক্ট উইথ ইন্ডিয়া। মানে সেই অর্থে তো তখন নেপাল এজ আ কান্ট্রি ছিল না, সো নেপাল হ্যাড আ মোর ডাইরেক্ট, ডিউ টু ইটস জিওগ্রাফি, a more direct contact with India, এবং the Nepalis carried on the tradition. In fact, এখনো আপনি যদি নেওয়ার আর্ট দেখেন, নেওয়ার আর্ট আমার দেখানোর ইচ্ছে ছিল, আমি সময় পাইনি, যে নেপালি বুদ্ধিস্ট আর্ট এখনো it still follows the Pala tradition. এই যে আমরা রেজিস্টার পেইন্টিং দেখলাম, নেওয়ার আর্ট ইজ স্টিল, ওরা স্টিল এইটাকে এক্স্যাক্টলি ধরে রেখেছে। তো এখানে অবভিয়াসলি নেপাল ইজ দ্য মিসিং থার্ড মানে piece of the jigsaw, but I was not able to handle the 3 together. That would be too diffuse আর কি। But yes, you are right, Nepal does have a very important role to play, and I mean it's a very long discussion. I'm sorry, I wish I could take some more time, but yes, it always figures in the equation, I mean in very different ways, man, at different points in history. So I'm sorry if I was not able to answer it, but it's definitely there. Okay, it's separate, but it's not. Also, it depends on how we see modern nation states ideally, right? Apni Nepal ke alada dhorben na ek dhorben, it is completely how you view geographical identities and how they evolve essentially. So ami for ease of context ami East Indian style bolechi, but of course
that's good. I just introduced this question because there was a debate between art historians in the 1960s 70s where there was this question that outside of East Indian tradition, Nepal had its own tradition. That is
ওই জন্য শুরু বেঙ্গল আর ইন্ডিয়ান আমি ক্লারিফাই করে দিলাম, because I don't want to descend into regionalism also here and not be very jingoistic. সব বাঙালি বাঙালি করতেও চাই না, but yeah, thank you so much.
কুশ, আপনাকে ছবিটা পাঠিয়েছি আমি।
Oh wait, just a sec. Sorry, আমি দেখছি। আচ্ছা নিচের ক্রিচার্স গুলো ওইটা, হ্যাঁ ওই দেখুন ওইটা হচ্ছে রাইট এক্স্যাক্টলি, ওটা হচ্ছে একটা খুব স্ট্যান্ডার্ড মানে সিংহাসনের প্যাটার্ন যেটা পাল যুগ থেকে ইয়ে হয়। ইটস অ্যাকচুয়ালি লাইক আ সিংহ, বাট ওগুলোকে সাউথ ইন্ডিয়ান টেম্পলসেও থাকে, ওগুলোকে ভাল্লি বা এই টাইপের কিছু বলে। দে আর বেসিক্যালি লাইক স্টাইলাইজড লায়ন। সো বেসিক্যালি দ্য ফর্মুলা গোজ, দাঁড়ান আমি দেখাচ্ছি, sorry to the others, if others want to see, let me just present very quickly. So sorry if I'm taking up too much. এই পেইন্টিংটাই উনি, এটা বেসিক্যালি একটা স্ট্যান্ডার্ড থ্রোন সিংহাসনের অ্যারেঞ্জমেন্ট which follows pretty much the standard পালাইয়ে। সো নিচে একটা হাতি, তারপরে ইটস আ গ্রিফিন or a stylized lion essentially, means a lion কিন্তু obviously it's stylized। তারপরে you have মকর, and তার উপর you have this কীর্তিমুখ on top. So if you can see the presentation, it's a কীর্তিমুখ, it's a মকর, then it's a lion, and the lion is standing on an elephant. আমরা উড়িষ্যার মন্দিরে এই মোটিভটা এখনো দেখতে পাই, that the lion is standing on an elephant. So it's a এই দিকেও আছে দেখুন, but it's a stylized lion. It's like a mythical creature that is not actually lion, but it's like that. I hope I'm able to answer.
হ্যাঁ ধন্যবাদ, অনেক ধন্যবাদ।
কুশ, আমার একটা ছোট্ট প্রশ্ন আছে,
প্লিজ বলো।
যেটা হচ্ছে মির্জা এলিয়টের লেখায় পাওয়া যাচ্ছে। তা মির্জা এলিয়ট বলছেন যে এই তান্ত্রিকরা এরা বা তন্ত্র আসছে ফ্রম দ্য আর্কেইক হার্ট অফ দ্য অ্যাবরিজিনালস। সেখানে অথচ আমরা এই অ্যাবরিজিনালদের আর্টকে বা রিলিজিয়নকে বারবার প্রমোট করতে দেখছি এলিটদের, কখনো হর্ষকে, কখনো পালদের, হ্যাঁ মানে এলিটদের। এখান অথচ এই যে যারা চর্যাপদের কবি, তারা সবাই অ্যাবরিজিনাল বা নিম্নবর্ণের মানুষ, অত্যন্ত গরিব মানুষ। এই কন্ট্রাডিকশনটা কোথায়?
এই কন্ট্রাডিকশন হচ্ছে রিলিজিয়ন ইনস্টিটিউশনালাইজড হলেই সেটা এলিটের হাতে চলে যায়। এবং even in Tibet now, because sorry, it's a digression, these tantras have a lot of practices which are not supposed to monks de সেগুলো করা উচিত নয়, কিন্তু ইনফ্যাক্ট এই তন্ত্রগুলো অলমোস্ট এক্সক্লুসিভলি টিবেটে or Tibetan cultures এ monksরা প্র্যাকটিস করে। সো there is a very long process যেখানে তন্ত্র ট্রান্সগ্রেসিভ জিনিসগুলোকে মেটাফোরে ট্রান্সলেট করা হয়েছে যাতে মাংসরা করতে পারে। সো এটা একটা প্রসেস অফ স্যানিটাইজেশন বলতে পারো, এলিটদের হাতে একটা প্রসেস অফ স্যানিটাইজেশন, যেখানে অ্যাবরিজিনালদের ট্রান্সগ্রেসিভ তান্ত্রিক প্রিসেপ্টস গুলোকে নিয়ে একটা ভীষণ একটা এলিট সেটিং এ, এলিট না হলেও একটা রেয়ারিফাইড সেটিং এ বসানো হয়েছে বলতে পারো। তো এটা তো থাকবেই, এই অ্যাপ্রোপ্রিয়েশনটা তো
এই অ্যাপ্রোপ্রিয়েশন, কিন্তু তা সত্ত্বেও পরবর্তীকালে যদি আমরা গৌড়ীয় বৈষ্ণব ধর্মে আমরা দেখতে পাই, বা বাউল ফকিরদের মধ্যে যে এসোটেরিক প্র্যাকটিস, আমরা রিচুয়ালিস্টিক প্র্যাকটিস আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি, সেখানেও কিন্তু ওই নিম্ন বর্ণের মানুষ, দরিদ্র মানুষের মধ্যে কিন্তু এই প্র্যাকটিস গুলো রয়ে গেছে।
কিন্তু শান্তনুদা, কিন্তু এখন পার্বতী বাউলের থেকে ধরো ইমনকে লোকে বেশি চেনে বাউল গান করতে। তো সেটাই বেসিক্যালি হয়েছে। এক সময় হয়তো পার্বতী বাউলদের মতনই মানুষরা তন্ত্র করতেন, এখন সেটা ধরুন পপুলার সিঙ্গাররা, ইউ গেট মাই অ্যানালজি আর কি। এই তো হয় আর কি, সেটা এখনো হচ্ছে। বাউল যেভাবে আরবান কলকাতা সেটিং এ রিপ্যাকেজ করা হচ্ছে, ইটস এক্স্যাক্টলি দ্য সেম থিং।
শান্তনু, ওই মৌসুমী দিকে একটুখানি